Welcome. Thank you for attending and joining us today, this morning, and welcome everyone for attending CFHK's Foundation's third Hong Kong Symposium, Repression and Resistance in Hong Kong, Global Implication and U.S. Policy Options. I'm Frances Hui, Policy and Advocacy Coordinator, and your MC today. A huge thank you to the Congressional Executive Commission on China and the U.S. Capitol for hosting us today. And by the way, I know the room is a bit empty, but I know that there's a line outside that's waiting to come in. So we'll start the program because our guests are coming on tight schedule, and we'll start, and they can come into the room as they arrive. Today we're joined by many of you here, including members of Congress, diplomats, experts and advocates, and many others watching our live stream from around the world. Just housekeeping for today's program. Our program today is on the record. We are also running live on our YouTube and Twitter. We have an in-house photographer and videographer who will be taking photos and recording during this event. You're welcome to take pictures of the speakers and any parts of the program, but please avoid taking snapshots of other participants. Thank you. And we'll have a few remarks from our honorable guests, presentations on our recent reports, and 3 panel discussions. You will find a detailed agenda in your program. Please note that the schedule might shift to accommodate our speakers, but if you have any questions, you're always welcome to ask one of our staff who are present today. Let's keep in mind that 5 years after the national security law was implemented, repression in Hong Kong has intensified. There were nearly 2,000 political prisoners since 2019, but resistance continues. Hong Kongers on the ground and abroad continue to find ways to resist the Chinese Communist regime. And today is about finding policy responses to match that courage and to light a candle of hope for democracy. To start us off, it's now my honor to invite our board chair, Ambassador James Cunningham, former U.S. Ambassador and Consul General in Hong Kong and Macau, to deliver opening remarks. Please join me in welcoming him to deliver today's opening remarks.
Thanks, Frances, and thank you to all of you for joining us live and online. And again, I also want to give a special expression of gratitude to the tremendous support we've received from members of the Congress, from the Select Committee on China. I just want to say a few words about why we should still be caring about what goes on in Hong Kong, why we should care about the political prisoners in Hong Kong and the status of freedom there, and most of all about the people of Hong Kong, what they're going through. We all know that we're in a period of immense change. The post-Cold War order that has served, I would argue, served the world so well for the past decades is being reshaped by forces that some of which we can control and some of which we can't. But it's definitely moving, and part of that movement is a change in the systems and values that we have worked, people like me and you have worked so hard to nourish and establish for decades, since the Second World War and particularly since the end of the Cold War. All that's now in question, and the order that created such historic development and progress around the world, not just in what's considered the West, but really around the world, is now being called into question. And that's not just an issue for the so-called West, it's an issue for anybody around the world who wants to join in that dream of freedom and growing and expanding prosperity that we've tried to nurture. And it's especially ironic, I think, that one of the main beneficiaries of that order is China. And now China is seeking to rewrite that order in a way that's more in accordance with its vision of how the future should develop. That was extremely clear from the meeting last week in China between President Xi and President Putin, Kim, representatives from Tehran and other places. It was very explicit in Xi's remarks that what he sees this period about is rewriting the world order on his terms. and on terms that are, he thinks, are friendly to his vision, to China's vision of authoritarianism, and a vision very much shared by Russia and others, unfortunately. That poses a terrible challenge for those of us in the West who are not able to order our politics and our diplomacy and our international efforts with the same, shall we say, ease as authoritarian regimes are. So Hong Kong is where that contest emerges in real life, where it intersects. Hong Kong did represent a vision of that kind of future, not just for Hong Kong itself, but for Asia and for those of you who have been around Hong Kong for quite some time. There was hope that at some point that kind of vision would transfer itself into China, the rest of China itself, as Hong Kong was China's most free city. Today, the Hong Kong authorities and the Chinese authorities are trying to revive the image of Hong Kong as Asia's world city, a claim that I think is on its face ridiculous, where there's a city with no personal freedom, or rather freedom that can be taken away at the discretion of the state. There is no genuine rule of law because your freedom can be taken again by the state, your property can be taken by the state under various pretexts. And there remain, of the almost 2,000 people who were arrested for political crimes, some 750 are still in prison right now as I speak, including, first and foremost, of course, Jimmy Lai, who's been in solitary confinement for almost 5 years. So why should we stand in support of the freedom of the Hong Kong people? First of all, because it's the moral and right thing to do, to support freedom over repression. Second, because we have to hold China to its obligations. It committed to a future vision of Hong Kong that it's now ignoring. And a China that can make commitments and then just ignore them in the future cannot be a partner for the rest of the world in the end. As part of its international role, it has to be forced to confront and fulfill its commitments. And lastly, because it is the commitment to those values that have been extinguished in Hong Kong and that we're trying to preserve and expand. It's those values that in the end will define a world with greater freedom and growing prosperity for all the people who desire it. So again, I thank you for your support and interest, and for those of you watching online, and I think we have a great day in store for you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We'll continue with brief remarks from members of Congress. Please welcome Representative Raja Krishnamurthy of Illinois' 8th District, ranking member of the House Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party, and a lead co-sponsor of the Jimmy Lai Way Act. Congressman, welcome.
Hey, good morning. It's an honor to be with you. It's an honor to be any place they can pronounce my name right. So I want to observe those 3 rules of public speaking: be short, be sweet, and be gone. 3 points. First of all, I'm going to take a point of personal privilege and say hello to Jonathan. And can you give him a big round of applause for running a great organization? And Francis, thank you for your very kind introduction, and thank you to all of you. Second point is we have problems, folks. We have problems. You know that. That's why we're here today. And I don't want to go through the long list of issues that we have in Hong Kong, but suffice it to say that ever since the national security law was instituted, we have a different Hong Kong than anything that we've seen ever before. And as a consequence, you know, speaking your mind can land in prison, printing the truth in the newspaper can land you in prison, standing peacefully for democracy can land you in prison. Basically, exercising your rights can land you in prison, and you will be repressed, you'll be suppressed, you will be punished, and basically you will not be tolerated in the way that you might have been just 20 years ago. And so that is what we're up against right now in Hong Kong, among other things. And so I'll just transition to my third and final point. It's a little more extended, but it's important, which is what can we do here? Because we have leverage if we can use it, okay? There are various things. One, I think we should absolutely pass the Jimmy Lai Way Act. I'm going to get this right. Jimmy Lai Way Act. As you know, it's somewhat symbolic, but it's also important as a reminder to our colleagues everywhere that we're not going to forget Jimmy Lai. I had the opportunity to meet with his family in the winter, and they are doing everything they can. And there's a bipartisan group of lawmakers pretty much around the world at this point who are actively trying to have him freed. But we have to do everything we can here to use our leverage to make that so. But it's not just Jimmy Lai. There are numerous other people who've been imprisoned. We talk about Jimmy Lai as one example, but he's actually just one of many who need to be freed as well. And I just call on the Trump administration to continue to bring him up along with others in their ongoing discussions with Beijing. Secondly, we need to, this is going to be getting into the weeds a little bit, but at this point we believe that Hong Kong is a place of concern because it's a place of money laundering, it's a place where dubious financial transactions are happening, and so we want to basically call it what it is. And we want to make sure that any institutions that operate there know that they're doing so in a very questionable location. And they're going to have to meet with enhanced transparency and reporting requirements for the U.S. government to recognize them as legitimately operating in Hong Kong. Thirdly, we need to do everything we can to provide refuge for people fleeing from Hong Kong. Am I right about that? There are people here who are living in fear because they are being targeted from Beijing over here in the United States. And on top of that, their government is questioning constantly their status to stay here. So they're basically getting it both from Beijing and from Washington now. Instead, we should give them a place of refuge. And we should make it clear that they can stay as long as they need to avoid the repression from Beijing. Last, we have to sanction people in Hong Kong, the officials who are basically going along to get along, in many cases, with the Beijing regime, or who have been installed by the Beijing regime in Hong Kong to run things and to repress people. And we have to sanction them, and we have to make sure that they know that basically, as a tool of Beijing, we are going to treat them like they are Beijing. And so we're going to continue to monitor their movements. We're going to continue to make sure that they don't feel welcome in all the places where they used to go freely, as long as they continue with the repression of people in Hong Kong and the way that they run the government there. Am I right about that? Are you with me on these things? I feel like these are just basic things. And so I hope that today, as you're going to different lawmakers' offices and meeting with people, that you would bring up some of these so that, you know, folks can kind of get on board and, you know, make sure that Beijing hears from all of us that it's not okay what they're doing in Hong Kong. It's not okay. And so we're going to continue to stand with Hong Kongers, just as we are with Uyghurs. I see my good friends from the Uyghur community, and as I see our friends from the Tibetan community and others who are dissenters. I think all of us together need to stand shoulder to shoulder against what's happening with Beijing. So thank you so much for doing that. Thank you for being here, and thank you for allowing me to address you briefly. So appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman, for coming and for your steadfast support on our movement and leadership at the Select Committee. At this time, I'm very excited to announce that we are launching the CFHK's new report. I'm sure many of you are aware of this already. It was released 2 days ago, and is an investigation that shines light on the systemic abuse and political control inside Hong Kong prisons. I would like to invite my colleague, Shannon Van Sant, our Strategy and Public Affairs Advisor, to join me. Samuel Beckett, who is also an author of this report, is coming. I know there have been traffic on the way because of the rain, but he will join me after, in the middle of this. So he'll come right into the panel as we speak. Three of us will give a 20-minute or so, presentations, overview of the key excerpts and insights from this groundbreaking report. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you so much, Francis. 10 years ago, Hong Kong had no political prisoners. Since 2019, more than 1,900 people have been sent to Hong Kong's prisons on political charges, and nearly 800 men, women, and youth remain jailed for their democratic activism. Political prisoners are routinely held in Hong Kong for years without bail and singled out for harassment and isolation. We have produced an 88-page report capturing the political prisoners' lives in Hong Kong and the conditions in which they have been jailed. My colleagues Sam and Francis interviewed 17 former prisoners and reveal a prison system that has normalized abuse and neglect, suppressed dissent, and violated international and local legal standards. Hong Kong's prisons are a hidden front in the city's broader assault on democracy, human rights, and civil liberties. As our report shows, unchecked power and abuse carried out behind prison walls prevent accountability. I'm very proud of Francis and Sam for their work on this. Sam spent nearly 4 years in prison in Hong Kong, an experience that he says changed and traumatized him. In this report, Sam draws from his lived experience. As Frances introduced earlier, she began her democracy activism at the age of 14, and many of Frances's friends are currently in jail. If Frances had not left Hong Kong, instead of hosting this symposium and presenting our report here today, it is very possible that Frances would be alongside them and in one of the prisons our report documents. Thank you.
So I'm going to start off by sharing some of our findings, and what my part will focus more on is how the abuse is attacking political prisoners, how they're being targeted and isolated. Just 2 months ago, while we were writing this report, the Hong Kong government tightened the prison rules to ban visits from certain clergy, lawyers and doctors to prevent what it calls the soft resistance. And after that, members of pro-democracy political parties have started to be refused permission to visit their friends from behind bars. And this development underscores the urgency of our report to show how political prisoners are being singled out for intensive targeting and control. Inside Hong Kong prison, guards compile daily intelligence reports, monitoring political prisoners' activities and contacts with the outside world. They face enhanced physical searches, confiscation of letters, and severe restrictions on communications. And at the center of this is the Committee for Safeguarding National Security, the CSNS, which is established under the national security law. It is chaired by the chief executive and includes Beijing-appointed officials. Its decisions are not subject to judicial review, and its work is legally shielded from disclosure. One of the levers that CSNS has over prisoners is the denial of sentence remission on national security ground. So previously, previously, prisoners sentenced to more than 1 month could earn up to 1/3 of their sentence remission for good conduct. But after the Article 23 legislation was passed in 2024, national security offenders must not be granted remission. So as a result, many of the political prisoners have been denied remission. And the CSNS actually has consulted the CSD commissioner and the court at least twice, stating that they believe the prisoners involved would endanger national security. Since 2021, at the height of the crackdown, the CSD has introduced national security into the prison system. It launched the Project Path, which is really a political indoctrination program that includes watching pro-CCP lectures and routine counseling that is designed to prompt political prisoners to confess extreme views and express remorse to their actions. Authorities have claimed that 99% of protest-related prisoners have voluntarily participated in this program. But we have interviewed former political prisoners who describe an implicit threat and punitive consequences for opting out, including solitary confinement. I wanted to take a moment to show you all what a solitary confinement cell looks like in Hong Kong. This picture on the left, this is exactly what the cell looks like in Hong Kong. It is about 80 square feet, and on the left side of it, this is a plastic-made gray bed. It's hard. So here are some folded beddings. There are not a lot of them, but a lot of prisoners will use them to kind of lay them on the bed, so it makes it a little bit softer, but it doesn't really help because it's hard plastic fiber. Behind this wall is a toilet and sink. And then on this side are stools that you can put belongings there, and prisoners sometimes would use this to write their letters and write notes. On this side, this picture is actually a snapshot of a video footage that was leaked by a CSD officer. This is the actual footage of a cell in Lai Chi Kok. And you can see the bed is here, and the stools. This is actually a prisoner, you can see a prisoner laying on the floor, kind of crawling up his body. In the video, he was, in a really weird posture, and he was actually presumably hurting himself during this video while it was taken. And I want you to look at this area. If you can't see it, you may stand up. And I want you to look at this area that we have yellow taped around. This is about the size of a solitary confinement cell in Hong Kong. Like I said, it's about 80 square feet. And it is where all of our panel will happen today. And I want you to imagine yourself being in this space for more than 23 hours a day, surrounded by concrete walls, with a tiny air vent on the gate as your only source of light. This is Jimmy Lai's life every day behind bars, and it is frequently being used disproportionately and arbitrarily against political prisoners. The Hong Kong prison used two forms of solitary. One is the punitive ones, which will last about up to 28 days, and the non-punitive ones called removal from association, which has been used to isolate political prisoners for a longer period of time. I know it is a bit weird to say that they're non-punitive because political prisoners are exactly being punished with it for their activism. But this is the by-the-book rule that authorities have been using to put political prisoners in solitary. This rule allows CSD to impose non-punitive isolation for a list of reasons. And 2 months ago, they have added safeguarding national security to the list of reasons in order to justify the practice of putting political prisoners in there. In this chart, you can see how non-punitive solitary spiked to 1,037 cases in 2021 at the peak of the crackdown. It dropped and then rose again to 879 cases in 2024. The durations have also lengthened. In 2024, 42% of the cases lasted for more than a month. Authorities have claimed that all cases that lasted over 4 months were requested by the inmates, including high-profile political prisoner like Jimmy Lai. But however, the testimonies that we have collected indicated that those requests were coerced under threat. These practices routinely exceed the 15-day international limit. Next slide, thank you. We learned that former lawmaker Lan Kwok-hong, he's on the left, he has been held alone with no nearby inmates for an extended period of time. Whenever he moves from one place to another in prison, guards would clear the corridor, the entire area, and put up tarps on both sides to block the view and escort him very closely with more staff, more officer nearby. He's assigned to work alone on tedious tasks. Our sources have told us that the conditions have caused him great distress. And if you remember a series of photos published by AP, an AP journalist took of Jimmy Lai moving within Stanley Prison. After the photos were published, CSD adopted a new approach to remove him entirely from public sites, like having him exercise in a cover area and clearing his surroundings whenever he needs to move outside. Last but not least, the communications rights. It's a lifeline for a lot of political prisoners to keep their communications from the outside world. But it is heavily curtailed for a political prisoner. Their letters are censored, delayed, or outright confiscated for security reasons. Visits are under constant surveillance. The visitors and the prisoners themselves all knew about this. The conversations were recorded. Prisoners were pressured to reject visits from certain people that CSD dislike. And religious rights also face restrictions. Notably, Jimmy Lai has been denied regular access to Holy Communion and proper pastoral visits. Our sources have also told us that when Cardinal Joseph Zen, he's on the left, when he was visiting the prison, 2 guards would sit behind him and take notes, which is not usually the practice, and it violates international standards for requiring private pastoral visits. This is the scale of isolation and control used to suppress dissent and push political prisoners away from activism. I'll now hand it over to Sam, who will cover other areas of abuse and neglect affecting the broader prison population, which of course includes political prisoners.
Okay. Where's the clicker? Oh, okay. I'll just do it over here then. And Francis was talking a lot about political prisoners and what they face specifically. I'm going to talk a little bit about the broader prison population as well. Keep in mind, of course, that political prisoners are part of the broader prison population, so they're facing this all themselves. I was a political prisoner. I experienced a lot of this as well. Starting with physical abuse. Now you'll see on the screen there, this is a picture of one hallway in the Lai Chi Kok, what they call the Lai Chi Kok Reception Center, which is a bit of an Orwellian name for a prison. On the right side, behind the man in white, is a cell that I was in. Where the camera is, there is a stairwell, and that stairwell doesn't have, where the cameraman is, there's no surveillance camera there. That stairwell was known as a place where prisoners would be brought to be beat up by guards. One time when I was in that cell, they took that screen in the back, they put it in front of my cell so that we couldn't see much, and then they beat a prisoner. We heard him screaming, but we glimpsed him walk by as he was bloody and put in the back where he was never seen again by any of us, at least. That was a very common thing. There are places all over the prisons that are known not to have cameras where people are brought to be beaten up. We confirmed this with another interviewee that you see at the bottom there, Gary, who had a similar experience there. Heard someone get beat up there who came in crying and bloodied and bruised. In the juvenile prisons, it's even worse. The juvenile prisons seem to be set up in a way that is designed to terrorize them. Sometimes it's the prison guards will beat up prisoners, attack them, and things like that. But they also delegate to certain prisoners called B-boys or B-tie the ability to do that. Guards will turn the other way. There is rampant sexual and physical abuse among juveniles. This is something, by the way, that's been reported in Hong Kong for a long time, and they do nothing. Why do they do nothing? Because CSD wants it to be that way. It is something they see as part of the system as a way to terrorize these people. Francis, in particular, interviewed a young prisoner. Do you want to talk about that for a second, that experienced some of this?
Yeah, well, I interviewed a juvenile prisoner. He was 17 years old when he was sent to Pick Oak, one of the male juvenile prison. His name is Andrew, and during that time, he experienced a prolonged physical and sexual violence by a B-boy, including being forced to repeatedly perform oral sex and threatened with further violence if he refused. And later, when he was sent to another juvenile prison, he actually witnessed another inmate in his dorm being coerced by other inmates into, excuse my language, masturbating, ejaculating, and drinking his own semen in front of them, which is horrifying to hear. And when I first interviewed him, he wouldn't tell me about this experience. And because the trauma was so raw, and it was so difficult for him to recall these memories, he was diagnosed with PTSD and anxiety and required regular visits with his psychiatrist. And I remember what he told me was really jarring. He said that the period of time have left a deep scar on him even now. And you know, he said sexual violence happens all the time here. It was not just him, which tells you a lot about how prevalent it is.
It's really traumatic, and that's a really important thing for all of the people we spoke to, the trauma that lingers here. In a prison system where if you look at their website, they talk about rehabilitation. You cannot rehabilitate prisoners, political or otherwise, if you are traumatizing them for years after they get out of prison. We're going to take a quick break because Senator Merkley is here, and we're just going to stop for a second, and we'll come back to this after Senator Merkley speaks, and I'll let Francis introduce him.
Thanks, Sam. At this time, I would like to invite Senator Jeff Merkley, who serves Oregon in the U.S. Senate. Senator Merkley is a senior leader on both the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Appropriation Committee, and is the former co-chair and ranking Democrat on the CECC. His tireless work includes passing bipartisan legislation, defending Hong Kong's democracy, addressing forced labor, and confronting the Uyghur genocide. Please join me in welcoming Senator Merkley for his remarks.
Well, greetings everybody, and I'm delighted to come and be part of this discussion, this gathering. In the past, I've quoted the saying, "Don't curse the darkness, light a candle," and this gathering is a candle. But I was also struck how in a Senate Foreign Relations Committee meeting it was pointed out that even physically lighting a candle in Hong Kong is now illegal if you're trying to commemorate the Tiananmen event. And so when we come to a world, did I use this? I'll even turn it on. All right. We've come to a world where even the simple act of physically lighting a candle is an expression of opinion that is being squashed by the oppression in Hong Kong. And I think it's symbolic of the challenge that we face in fighting for freedom, in fighting for freedom of expression, for freedom of assembly, for folks to be able to thrive and help guide their own future. What's happening in Hong Kong is a warning to the world of what happens when we fail to defend the rule of law. We had the yellow umbrella protests in Hong Kong that were so powerful, but the fierce strength of the Chinese forces were brought to bear. The draconian 2020 national security law, the 2024 Article 23, and now we have more than 1,000 political prisoners held, often prevented from talking to a lawyer or talking to a religious advisor. Many of their names are well known to all of you. Benny Tai and Gwyneth Ho and Joshua Wong. Of course, the most famous in terms of the general public is Jimmy Lai, now 77 years old, a British citizen, held in prolonged solitary confinement for going on 5 years. And what has he been accused of? He's been accused of journalism, of publishing the Apple Daily, and that simply publishing a newspaper is an act of collusion or sedition, for sharing facts with the public. During his trial, which lasted over 150 days, he said, "All I was doing was carrying a torch to the reality of what was unfolding." We talk about lighting a candle. Even brighter than a candle is a torch. Even more dangerous is a torch that illuminates further into the darkness. And now he's awaiting what punishment will be delivered or what conclusion will be delivered on that trial. He's suffering from diabetes as well. We keep pushing strongly for his release and the release of others. Of course, his son Sebastian has been a tireless champion, and his son has been here, and he's not here this year, I believe, right? He's not with us? No, not here with us. And I'm glad that it got President Trump's attention. And President Trump said just last month that he was going to do everything I can to save him. We need the attention of the high levels of the U.S. government to help apply pressure, and not just pressure for one case, but pressure to end this political oppression. And that oppression now reaches into the United States of America, with the government of China offering bounties to return individuals for prosecution. That's a strategy to intimidate and coerce activists like Francis, who has been subject to one of these bounties, and Anna Kwok, Executive Director of Hong Kong Democracy Council. And this strategy includes going after family members. That's a strategy of transnational oppression. And that has included going after Anna's father and brother. Her brother was arrested, is out on bail. Her father awaits trial. It's helpful to focus on specific bills that we can use to amplify the discussion here in Congress, educating people about the bills, voting on the bills in committee, voting on them in the floor. It's helpful to have bipartisan bills, and I wanted to mention the three that I'm involved in. The first is the Transnational Repression Policy Act. It holds foreign authoritarian governments and individuals accountable when they stalk, intimidate, or assault dissidents and diaspora communities across their borders, including the U.S. I'm the lead sponsor of it. The lead co-sponsor is Senator Dan Sullivan. The Hong Kong Judicial Sanctions Act mandates sanctions on Hong Kong judicial officials complicit in human rights abuses. The lead sponsor is Dan Sullivan. I'm the lead co-sponsor, and Senator Curtis is also a co-sponsor. And the Stop CCP Money Laundering Act, requiring the U.S. government review of Hong Kong's role in enabling sanctions evasion that benefits U.S. adversaries like Russia, Iran, and China, introduced by Senator Curtis and co-sponsored by me. But it'd be great to have a long list of co-sponsors, and it gives you tools that you can use in advocating with members of the House and members of the Senate, or certainly with their staff members. St. Francis Assisi said, "All the darkness in the world cannot extinguish the light of a single candle." Well, thank goodness so many people are continuing to light candles and to light torches. Let us not fail to do so with every opportunity we have, every opportunity we can create. And this event is certainly an important torch in putting light to diminish the darkness. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator Merkley. Okay. Now, I think we can go back to our previous discussion. Okay, cool.
And, you know, as Senator Merkley was talking about Jimmy Lai, imagine having to stay in this cell, as, you know, most of us are significantly younger and healthier than Jimmy Lai. I stayed in a cell like this. I got to go out frequently during the day. Jimmy Lai doesn't get to do that. And it's not just Jimmy. It's many of the political prisoners stuck in these cells every day. So we spoke some about the juvenile prisons and the rampant sexual abuse there. Again, a lot of what we've talked about here, a lot of what's in our report, we have uncovered new stuff. That's not new. That has been talked about in Hong Kong for years, and they have not fixed it. I think it's also telling, this is a good point to note, that after we released our report, the Commissioner of Correctional Services, within 24 hours, issued a long letter denying that any of this was true and calling it defamation. Obviously, the only responsible approach to a report like this is for CSD to say, we will investigate this and get back to you. If they want to deny it then, they can. They didn't do that. They immediately went to, none of this is happening. So we know what to expect from them without outside pressure on this. Medical neglect. Almost every single prisoner that we spoke to talked about medical neglect, how they had problems in prison, medical problems that they couldn't get treated. This was a huge one on the screen there. Our interviewee, Harry, was in a prison with a Ghanaian prisoner. He was later reported out to have died on the way to the hospital, but we've talked to Harry, we talked to others, and learned how he died. He was denied medical coverage for weeks. The man had mental health issues. He couldn't speak. The guards said if he can't personally request medical assistance, which they knew he was unable to do, then they wouldn't give it to him. One night he had a stroke, he was rushed to the hospital, and he died in the ambulance. Other prisoners we talked to had dislocated thumbs that they couldn't get treated. They were sent back to work, told that they were faking it. I had a broken finger in prison. I couldn't get it treated until after I got out of prison, and for the rest of my life, I won't be able to fully close my finger as a result. This is a common thing that we heard from virtually all prisoners. The disgusting nature of the prisons in Hong Kong is another major one. Water leaks everywhere, buckets in your cell, the sanitation and hygiene issues that causes. Toilets don't work. This was the biggest problem in Lai Chi Kok Reception Center, where every prisoner goes. None of the toilets work. They get backed up. The place smells like sewage. You have rats coming out of the toilets. You have cockroaches every night. Jimmy Lai wrote about how he woke up one night to have cockroaches crawling on him. You see them everywhere. You know, as one of our interviewees said, it's like sleeping in a sewer, and that really struck me because that's how I remember it as well. The brutal heat. So in the summer in Hong Kong, it easily gets above 100 degrees Fahrenheit on many days. Even at night, it can be brutally hot. A lot of these cells don't really have any kind of breeze going through them, tiny windows, if any window at all. It is very, very painfully hot in there, and this causes a lot of problems. Skin problems, hyperventilation, breathing problems, and things like that. You know, the CSD has said that air conditioning would be a luxury, which maybe it would be in some locations. In a place like Hong Kong, it is a necessity. But they don't provide air conditioning to prisoners. In certain work rooms, like laundry, where there are hot machines, it becomes even worse. And yet, under prison regulations, you're required to wear heavy clothes all day long. It is very, very painful for a lot of these prisoners. Forced labor. Now, some everyone is required to work. Some workshops are easier than others, but there are many workshops where there are a lot of really difficult situations that people are in. We talked about laundry. That can be a very difficult one depending on your job. People we spoke to had injuries they couldn't get treated from ironing. The heat is a problem for everyone. One prisoner that I interviewed talked about a rather Kafkaesque situation where there simply wasn't work to do, but since everyone is required to work, she in one of the women's prisons was required to sit there with other prisoners. They were handed 6 folders, and all day long they had to fold those folders and unfold those folders and fold them again, and they would do that every day. They weren't allowed to speak. This is obviously something that creates a lot of mental health issues at the end. You're not doing anything except doing the same thing over and over and over. One big problem, and this was well known in the prisons, there's a notorious psychiatric treatment center called CULAM. CULAM is, it can be used if you have actual psychiatric problems, but it's misused by the prison system. Now, a lot of times you have an occasional prisoner who will file complaints. Now, you can't punish that prisoner officially for filing a complaint. So what's a big thing that they do? They'll send him for psychiatric treatment to CULAM. I knew somebody in prison who complained a lot. He had the right to do that. One day he disappeared. 3 days later, he showed back up. He'd been sent to CULAM. He'd been put in a cell with nothing to read, no one to talk to for 3 days. And they knew he'd never seen a psychiatrist, never seen any kind of treatment, and then he had been sent back. Suffice to say, this terrifies people once they do it, and he was pretty quiet after that. Now, Francis is going to talk a little bit about the complaint mechanism, and that's a good segue into it, as really complaints are just not something that is viable to actually file. You can talk about a little bit about that, Francis.
I think it's a good way to wrap it up to see how the systemic abuse is being continued to be prolonged and enabled. When you hear a lot about these abuses and neglect occurring daily behind the walls, prisoners on the paper, they technically have channels to file complaints, but in practice, these processes are being controlled internally by CSD. There is a complaint investigation unit, which was housed within the CSD, and that's most of the complaints we go to. And as you see from this chart, you can see that 99% of the complaints are being dismissed. There are probably, last year, there's 1 case among 59 in total cases were being substantiated by CSD. And so during this process, you request a form. You first have to request a form from the officer that already caught their attention to, all the way through filing a complaint and during the investigation. So many of these steps can be obstructed. The officers are able to threaten the prisoners to retaliate from giving them harsher conditions or to solitary confinement. And this environment have deterred prisoners from speaking up and seeking justice. So taken together, all these surveillance we talked about, solitary confinement, violence, abuse, and social isolations, all were shielded by this obstructed complaint mechanism. This creates a closed loop of systemic abuse insulated from transparency and accountability. Sam, do you want to cover some of the policy recommendations?
Yeah, so we'll wrap up here with a couple of things. So our report talks a lot about how this situation violates international law. I think everybody knows sort of implicitly that it does, and I won't get that into that. One thing I will note, though, Hong Kong has explicitly agreed, signed their name as a government onto the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights and to the Convention Against Torture. In both of those cases, this is the government of Hong Kong agreeing to treat prisoners to a basic minimum standard of care that they're not doing. There is a United Nations document called the Mandela Rules that lays out in great detail how prisoners are supposed to be treated, and they are falling short here. Certainly not the only government in the world where that's the case. But, for Hong Kong itself, we need to hold them to account. Even for governments that don't necessarily always meet every standard, we need to hold each other to account, and we need to hold them to account. And there's an international pressure element of that that's going to be involved. And that gets to our recommendations. I'm not going to get into detail about these. You can read them in the report, but just to highlight a couple of things. Several years ago, the Commissioner on Human Rights in the UN issued a report that excoriated the Chinese government for its treatment of Uyghurs in detention. We think it's time for something similar to happen with respect to Hong Kong prisons when you've got thousands of political prisoners. Certainly the situation with Uyghurs is different, but when you've got rampant human rights abuses, there is a pattern and there is a precedent there, and we would like governments to press the UN to do that. And finally, the United States government itself. The United States has great sanctions regimes in place that can be used to sanction officials in Hong Kong for human rights abuses. We'd like to see the commissioner and the deputy commissioners of CSD sanctioned. We'd like to see those involved with national security who are responsible for some of the things that Francis talked about in the prisons to be sanctioned. There is still a great deal of work that can be done on the sanctions front to try to deter some of this behavior. And second, and I'll just mention, if any of you are staffers here, there's a program in Congress to adopt political prisoners, something you can bring to your member. I believe right now only Jimmy Lai has been adopted as a political prisoner. Is that right? But there are a lot of other political prisoners that it can be a chance for members of Congress to connect with the situation on the ground in Hong Kong, to connect with some of their families, at least if they're abroad, and to try to raise awareness about some of the situations that are going on for some of them. So I'll turn it over to Francis to wrap up.
Well, thank you very much, Sam and Shannon, for this presentation. And I wanted to remind everyone that if you're interested, we have copies of the full report and the executive summary at the back of the room. This is the report. You can find all of them in the back and the table at the back. You may also find them on our website at thecfhk.org. Join up. Oh. Okay. For this time, I want to, again, thank you all for showing up, and we'll actually now dim the lights and share this. Sorry. Okay. We'll share this 5-minute video to frame the day and show why policy matters, and then we will come back to a member's remarks.
Following the historic 2019-2020 pro-democracy protest in Hong Kong, Beijing imposed a national security law that destroyed freedom in the city and criminalized what the Chinese authorities describe as secession, subversion, terrorism, and colluding with foreign forces. Soon after the law came into effect, Hong Kong authorities undertook mass arrests of pro-democracy leaders and activists throughout the city, where freedom and rule of law were once respected. This also led to the shutdown of pro-democracy news outlets, including Apple Daily and Stand News, and the arrest of their senior editors and journalists. The founder of Apple Daily, Jimmy Lai, has been imprisoned in solitary confinement since December 2020. In his national security trial, he faces the possibility of being sentenced to life in prison by Beijing's hand-picked judges. Today, independent press in Hong Kong continue to face scrutiny and surveillance by the authorities. According to Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index, Hong Kong dropped from being one of the freest in 2003 to 135th place in 2024 out of 180 countries, just next to other nations that are hardly seen as democracies, like Oman and Algeria. Any open dissent is quickly crushed. Hong Kong authorities continue their crackdown on free speech, even trying to ban the protest song Glory to Hong Kong from digital platforms across the world. People who don't salute the flag or stand for the national anthem are jailed. All Hong Kong students are now required to take courses that promote obedience to the Chinese Communist Party, even in faith-based schools where those values contradict their religions. In 2024, the Hong Kong government imposed a second, more repressive national security law known as Article 23 to cover what it considers treason, sedition, and state secrets, and allow for trials to be held behind closed doors. As civil liberties continue to be repressed, many people and businesses have left Hong Kong. Despite living abroad, Hong Kong authorities have expanded their repressive actions by attempting to hunt down prominent activists overseas and carry out surveillance through its outposts around the world. A decade ago, Hong Kong had no political prisoners. Today, it is estimated that there have been almost 2,000 political prisoners in Hong Kong, ranging from 13 to 77 years old, many of whom are still languishing in prison. Hong Kong courts are holding the baton of the crackdown for the CCP in lengthy mass political trials. Judges and prosecutors contribute to the oppression of Hong Kongers by lending credibility to the regime's imprisonment of dissidents. Among the judges on Hong Kong's highest court, 2 are from the UK, 3 from Australia, and 1 from New Zealand. The deterioration of the rule of law in Hong Kong is a threat to international security, allowing Hong Kong to become a global smuggling hub for brutal regimes like Russia, North Korea, and Iran. In 2024, the CFHK Foundation published a groundbreaking report illustrating how Hong Kong entities, with the support of the Chinese government, are evading U.S. and international sanctions to provide key technology for the Russian war effort and needed goods and money for Iran and North Korea. In 2025, CFHK produced a collection of research reports on the abuses in Hong Kong prisons, foreign judges in Hong Kong courts, and the CCP's subnational strategy through Hong Kong's Greater Bay Area Initiative. We are working together with U.S. and international decision makers on policy recommendations to help the people of Hong Kong. Our work has impact. Early this year, the U.S. administration sanctioned 6 Hong Kong and Chinese officials whom we have worked to hold accountable. Members of Congress have introduced 6 bills on Hong Kong in both the House and Senate to address the different issues we advocated for. CFHK Foundation continues to drive discussions around the world on protecting Hong Kong's autonomy and freedom through policy advocacy and education. We will work to get political prisoners released and will continue to press for accountability for the CCP's assault on freedom that imperils Hong Kong's status as an international financial center. The Hong Kong people struggle under an oppressive regime. They need the international community to speak out as they are silenced. That's what we do at the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation. Give a voice to the freedom-loving people of Hong Kong. Make no mistake, we will work to strengthen the U.S. and international response and hold the CCP accountable for its crimes against the city.
All right. The film really underscores today's stake, and to build on the policy tools, I would like to now introduce Representative Chris Smith, the co-chair of both the Congressional Executive Commission on China and the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. Representative Smith has spent his career in Congress advocating for human rights in China and has authored historic human rights law bill, human rights laws, including the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, the Tibet Policy and Support Act, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, the Global Magnitsky Human Rights and Accountability Act. Congressman, thank you very much for coming.
Francis, thank you so very much, and thanks to all of you for being here, for your ever steadfast and courageous activities on behalf of those who are suffering depravity at the hands of Xi Jinping and all those who are part of that regime that now has unfortunately overtaken Hong Kong. As we all know, Hong Kong used to be a bastion of human rights, a place where people could exercise their freedoms. The basic laws certainly almost mirrored the U.S. Constitution and especially our Bill of Rights. And of course, the Sino-British treaty, which has been absolutely violated by China. I mean, if you can't follow your signature and your commitment on a treaty, and treaties are obligating, it just tells the entire world that you're not honorable and you cannot be trusted at all. You know, the culprits of what's happening with Hong Kong, and you know, Hong Kong, as of now, has been murdered, has been killed. That doesn't mean it stays that way forever. Our hope springs eternal. And as Francis and so many others would tell you, you know, we just never quit, both in Congress. It's bipartisan, thankfully. And of course, the White House has been speaking out very boldly with the president, asking again and again that Jimmy Lai be released. I was with Sebastian yesterday. We've had him at a hearing in the past. He is brilliant. He's just an amazing man. You know, the apple did not fall far from the tree when it came to Jimmy Lai and his son. And we're also calling on the British Prime Minister to meet with the family and to raise the issue because, of course, Jimmy Lai is a British citizen. So that hope, you know, and there is a meeting with the president next week, so and the Prime Minister. You know, as we all know, that the culprits can not only be found in Beijing. High-ranking Chinese Communist Party members, such as those on the Standing Committee of the National Security Congress, who passed the National Security Law in 2020, now are repressing all forms of political dissent, as we know. And, you know, the conviction of 45 amazing democracy activists, convicting them of subversion. They stand in solidarity with the best principles ever enunciated about freedom and democracy and free speech and the like, and yet they are now in prison. This culpability can be found, obviously, it's Xi Jinping on steroids in Hong Kong. We know after, you know, I've been in Congress 45 years. I've been working on Chinese human rights issues for 45 years. And after Tiananmen Square, it certainly went from very bad to extraordinarily and extremely worse. I am also concerned, like you are, about Celia Lam, a member of the Hong Kong Bar and the chair of the disciplinary tribunal, which is affiliated with the white shoe U.S. law firm Simpson, Thatcher, and Bartlett. You know, the complicity of people here in Washington and of others is horrible. We've seen this with other dictatorships, and now we're seeing it again as it manifests in Hong Kong. Well, this Celia Lam is a petty commissar who presided over the regulatory disbarment and punitive fining of Kevin Yam, a courageous solicitor who spoke out at our hearing of the Congressional Executive Commission on China in May of 2023 about the deteriorating rule of law in Hong Kong. In the months following his testimony, the Hong Kong authorities issued an arrest warrant against him, to which this past month, Ms. Lam added insult to injury, actions that prove Kevin Yam's very points. Contrary to the findings of the tribunal, Mr. Yam exemplifies the best traditions of the legal profession, promoting the cause of justice and upholding human rights and fundamental freedoms. Indeed, in Hong Kong, these fundamental freedoms, as I mentioned, were embedded in the basic law, and now they have been completely abrogated. And those who resist, they seek to break. And that's what's being unveiled today. We were made to suffer systemic abuse and political control in Hong Kong's prisons, authored by two brave young professionals, Samuel Beckett, and I read his op-ed in the Post the other day. It was brilliant, a long time coming, and I would invite you, if you would like, we will do a hearing on your findings at the time of your and Francis and others choosing, but we'll do it soon. either in the China Commission or in the Tom Lantos Commission. It has to be done. This has to be, it must get much more visibility because you have exposed just how much torture is happening inside these prisons, which is absolutely unconscionable. And I mean, it's very much detailed. The sexual assaults on people, women and men, need to be exposed and they need to be stopped. You know, Jimmy Lai, as we all know, is going through, you know, watching the video again and seeing his picture. I was with Sebastian yesterday. This just calls out for the world, from our White House to our Congress to every other freedom-loving parliament, and that includes the UK, to speak out on behalf of his freedom. So I urge you to continue it. We have seen the extinguishing of academic freedom in Hong Kong as well. The scholar Rowana He, who testified compellingly twice before our commission last year, was expelled from the Chinese University of Hong Kong and exiled from Hong Kong for teaching the taboo topic about Tiananmen Square. We know the great lengths that China goes through to completely whitewash the crimes committed at Tiananmen Square by the Chinese Communist Party. When Hu Jiatian came to the United States, who was the butcher of Beijing and ordered the tanks and the bayoneted troops to kill and to maim, when he was invited to the White House by Bill Clinton and got a 19-gun salute, I put together a hearing in 2 days. I had all these people who were witnesses to the killings that occurred there because Jiatian said nobody died at Tiananmen Square. What a big lie. The bigger the lie, the more gullible some people seem to be. And we invited him or anybody from the embassy to give an accounting for such false narratives as far as nobody showed up. So it just shows, this has been an ongoing, very serious problem, and we need to keep fighting for it. We also have the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Offices. Last year we passed it. It was my bill. It has not come up again this year, but it was blocked in the United States Senate. And I find that appalling. This is a den of spies and provocateurs and people who keep track of the diaspora and more, follow you and make sure that, there's one right here in Washington, there's one in New York, and of course there's one in San Francisco. When the big meeting with the president, Xi Jinping, occurred, the way they muscled and beat and tried to counter the people who were peacefully protesting. It's transnational repression on display, and we met with a lot of those people and had a hearing on that as well. So we need to get HKEDO passed. Our new bill would name the street right in front of their office for HKEDO after Jimmy Lai. So we're hoping that will get passed very soon and become the law. Again, I can't thank you enough. The piece, the entire report is very telling. And it has lacked visibility that in Hong Kong, there is torture going on, lots of torture. We need to expose it and do everything we can to stop it, and that includes getting the UN to do further actions there, and of course our own government and all governments that believe in freedom. Thank you for what you're doing. It's amazing.
Thank you, Congressman Smith, for your steadfast support in our movement and your leadership in both commission. Next, I would like to welcome Representative Jim McGovern, ranking member of the House Rules Committee, former chair and current member of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. He is a lead author of landmark human rights laws, including the Magnitsky Act, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, the Tibet Policy and Support Act, the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, and Protect Hong Kong Act. Congressman, welcome.
Well, first of all, thank you, Francis, for the generous introduction, and thank you for your courage. We need leaders like you all over the world, people who are willing to stand up and speak truth to power and to talk about the importance of human rights. And it's also great to be here with my longtime friend John Stivers and Ambassador Cunningham. Thank you for your service, and my colleague Chris Smith, who co-chairs the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. There's an old saying, you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. And I would like to think in the area of human rights is one area where people can come together no matter what their politics, no matter what their party affiliation is, and we try to do that in the Human Rights Commission. But I appreciate the invitation to join you all once again. This annual symposium is a vital way to keep Hong Kong on our radar screen. To get together to see familiar faces, it is important. It allows us to recommit to this cause. It allows you to meet with members of Congress and remind them about what is happening in Hong Kong. There's so much happening in the world that sometimes it's easier to let important matters slip by the wayside. But you being here is a way to keep Hong Kong front and center. And it's important to speak out for those who cannot be here today, those who are in prison unjustly, those who are trying to stay out of jail, bravely but quietly. These are friends, family, compatriots who fight for a free and open Hong Kong. They suffer for it, and we honor them and the personal sacrifices that they have made. Your event is here in the U.S. Capitol for a reason. Congress has long been a champion of Hong Kong and its people's quest for autonomy and dignity. We have passed many laws to affirm America's strong support for Hong Kong's autonomy and to hold accountable the officials in Hong Kong and in Beijing who are acting to deny the people of Hong Kong their basic rights. Let us commit to pursue an ambitious agenda for Hong Kong. Our thoughts go out to Jimmy Lai, as my colleague Mr. Smith has mentioned. He's a brave defender of freedom of the press, whose national security trial drags on. At age 77, Jimmy Lai suffers diabetes and lost considerable weight. He is not a person who belongs in prolonged solitary confinement. He should be released to get proper medical treatment. He should be free because publishing a newspaper and championing freedom of expression are not crimes. And it is outrageous that he remains in jail. With one voice, we continue to call for his immediate release and for the release of all the other prisoners of conscience who have been jailed under the national security law and its shameful cousin, Hong Kong's Article 23 National Security Ordinance. Prisoners in Hong Kong continue to suffer. And I'm glad to see the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong's new report. We were made to suffer systemic abuse and political control inside Hong Kong's prisons. It documents a prison system full of abuse and neglect, contrary to international and local legal standards. And I hope that officials in the administration take it seriously and act on its recommendations, and I will urge them to do so. I also hope that Congress can pass the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office Certification Act, which I am proud to sponsor along with Congressman Chris Smith, my co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, and Congressman John Molinar, chairman of the Select Committee, the Select China Committee. You know, the House passed this bill overwhelmingly a year ago, and I hope to see it again on the House floor soon. We need to get this into law. The H-Keto bill is based on a simple proposition. If the Chinese government doesn't want Hong Kong to be a separate autonomous entity, then the Hong Kong government shouldn't get its own separate diplomatic office. If they want Hong Kong to have its own office, then give them back their autonomy. We're okay with that. In the Senate, Marco Rubio championed this bill with Senator Jeff Merkley. As Secretary, I hope that his State Department can support it. We need to get this done. You know, Congress has a long bipartisan record on Hong Kong, but our ability to help Hong Kong, I'm afraid, has become more challenging. After the national security law was passed, Radio Free Asia closed its office in Hong Kong. in operation since 1996 and moved its personnel overseas. The dedicated staff at RFA continued to report on developments in Hong Kong from Taipei and beyond, and it gives the people of Hong Kong independent news in Cantonese. But that may be ending. The Trump administration is trying to kill RFA, and this makes absolutely no sense for the people of Hong Kong or for Americans. Don't we have a commitment to the people of Hong Kong? I hope that through authorization and appropriations, we can save RFA and other programs that support Hong Kong advocates. We stand for the autonomy of Hong Kong, not only because the Chinese government promised, not only because the Hong Kong people deserve it, we stand because autonomy is a principle grounded in international human rights. Quote, all peoples have the right of self-determination, end quote. Autonomous rights are not just something for people over there, but for people here too. You know, coming to the Capitol today, some of you may have seen uniformed troops patrolling the streets, or videos of masked agents whisking people away to undisclosed locations. This is happening because a party leader is using the power of the state to impose his will on an autonomous city, the District of Columbia. I find that offensive and I find that dangerous. Now, I'm not drawing a direct parallel, but the principle and the impulse to control are the same. Why should the Chinese government take our advocacy for Hong Kong seriously if our own leaders are acting in similar ways? We can learn a lot from the people of Hong Kong. Our ears are open, and I look forward to working with my colleagues and with you to keep the flame of hope burning for the people of Hong Kong. They are counting on us. And I thank you all again for all that you do to keep up the good fight, and I will continue to be wind at your back. Thank you so very much.
Do you want a picture, actually? Thank you very much. I wanted to echo the emphasis on the bipartisan support on our movement, which really makes it very unique and strong. And for that, we appreciate the support from both sides of the aisle for this entire time. Okay. So now, I just wanted to say, because we're a bit behind on our schedule, so we will not have a break we'll jump right into our panels. But if you want coffee or refreshment, feel free to, jump up and step outside. It's still available outside. Now we will begin the panel, our first panel, Judicial Independence and Media Freedom Under Siege. Our panel is moderated by Mark Clifford with panelists Simon Lee and Thomas Kellogg. Please join me in welcoming our speakers. Feel free to come up. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Francis. Thanks to all the members. Thanks to everybody's support here. I think you've gotten the general picture. Media freedom and judicial independence are very much under siege in Hong Kong. In keeping with the theme of this morning, we're going to talk not only about the repression and the bad things, but also about the resistance in Hong Kong, in Washington, and around the world. I mean, we're hopeful, we're fighting, we're lighting that candle or that torch in the darkness that some of the members spoke about. I'll first introduce the panel and then have people make some brief remarks, and then we'll have a bit of time for back and forth. Simon Lee joined Apple Daily as a columnist, writing on free market issues coming out of the Lion Rock Institute in Hong Kong more than 20 years ago. And he, not surprisingly, given his brilliance and his perceptiveness, became one of Jimmy Lai's top aides and was not only a great columnist, but was also instrumental in helping Apple and Next Magazine become one of the most technologically advanced media organizations in the world, a real path breaker. So he'll be talking especially about Apple and media. Tom Kellogg worked for Human Rights Watch, worked for the Open Societies Foundation, and now runs the Center for Asian Law at Georgetown University. We'll obviously be talking about law. So we have a situation in Hong Kong where it's gone. When I moved to Hong Kong in 1992 as a journalist, it was a media center for Asia, for really all of Asia. There wasn't another place that was as free, certainly not as international or global as Hong Kong was. Sign of the times. I was coming from South Korea, which was just coming out of military dictatorship. I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined that the New York Times would move most of its editorial operations from Hong Kong to Seoul. But I think that's a telling example of what kind of world we're in. On the judicial side, I mean, Hong Kong supposedly has the right to trial by jury. Defendants have the right to their own counsel, to presumption of bail. All of that has changed under the national security law. So let me start with Tom, if you don't mind, to just make a few remarks about first of all, where we've come from and where we might be going. Obviously, the last 5 years have been momentous in Hong Kong legal terms.
Can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful. Well, I just want to say thank you to CFHK for putting this wonderful event together, and thank you to all of you for braving the rain and getting through a bit of a line to make it in here this morning. Mark is absolutely right. The national security law has fundamentally transformed Hong Kong's legal system. He touched on basic due process rights, right? He touched on the right to pretrial release, or what we call bail here in the U.S. He touched on the right to a trial by a jury. He touched on the right to choose counsel of your own choosing, something that Jimmy Lai in particular has been denied. The national security law weakens or even completely obliterates all of those rights, and that in itself is very troubling. How can you say you get a fair trial if you're not allowed to choose your own lawyer, right? Why is it that the Hong Kong government is denying all national security law defendants the right to a trial by jury? Because they know that trials by jury will not lead to convictions, because they know the people of Hong Kong are wise and they can see through the ways in which the Hong Kong legal system is being weaponized against Hong Kong and Beijing's political opponents. Let's talk about substantive legal provisions, right? As you all know, there are 4 criminal provisions in the NSL, and all 4 of them have been used to target the Hong Kong and Beijing's political opponents. One of the things that I hope we can talk more about here today is not just the injustice that's being done to a brave defender of human rights and democracy like Jimmy Lai, not just the so-called Hong Kong 47 case, which led to an unprecedented 10-year sentence for legal academic Benny Tai. Not just some of the more high-profile cases, but also the ways in which the law has been used against everyday Hong Kongers, peoples whose names were not really well known to the broader community and the international community. But just because they went online, for example, and criticized their government, they found themselves facing national security charges, either under the NSL or under the colonial era sedition provision of the crimes ordinance, now updated as part of Article 23 legislation, right? These substantive provisions are so vague and so overbroad that they can be used to criminalize all sorts of behavior. And one of the things that I hope that we'll talk about during the discussion is the way in which I think these criminal provisions will be expanded in the months and years to come, to crack down on private companies, for example, that are doing business deals that Beijing doesn't like, to crack down on critics of the Hong Kong government outside of the national security space. Now that this law is in place, it will be used to tackle all sorts of new quote-unquote challenges in the months and years to come. One last point on the NSL that I think is worthy of note and hopefully some discussion here today is the ways in which the NSL creates new governing structures. Let's give Beijing a little credit. From 1997, they, facially speaking at least, allowed Hong Kongers to govern Hong Kong. They did not station mainland officials in Hong Kong to formally exercise governing authority. We all know they were operating behind the scenes. We all know that they were engaging directly with the chief executive and other government officials, but that was operating at least with a fig leaf of plausible deniability. Now we have, for the first time in Hong Kong history since 2020, mainland officials operating openly in Hong Kong through the Committee for Safeguarding National Security and the Office for Safeguarding National Security. And of course, these new entities are completely shielded both from judicial review and from government sunlight laws. So the Hong Kong people, and certainly those of us watching here in Washington, have no idea what they are doing on a daily basis. But there's certainly a lot of them doing it. Well, let me leave it there, and I look forward both to Simon's remarks and to the broader discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. Yeah, Simon, I was on the board of directors. You were watching as the government shut down Apple Daily. The government says it was all legal and it had nothing to do with politics. So maybe you could, in a way, it extends from some of the issues Tom was talking about, because the government was able to use the national security law to shut a newspaper without a court order and say that it was all legal. So I think for the benefit of people here, it'd be interesting to hear that story.
Weaponizing the law is something that I consider the very last step that they take on Hong Kong and Apple Daily and the people. If we look back in the history, I think the turning point was the first time the Chinese government tried to impose Article 23, which was 23 years ago, 2003. Actually, it was like at the end of 2002. I still remember a journalist asked the Secretary for Justice in Hong Kong, "Oh, are we going to do the Article 23 anytime soon?" Because there was rumor. And the Secretary of Justice back then, L.C. Leung, says, "Oh, no, we didn't have a plan." It was 2002. But then all of a sudden, I think by the fourth quarter, around October, Beijing says, no, you have to do it. And then Hong Kong people protested, and also the elite circle, the property tycoons, were not very comfortable with that. So eventually, the Hong Kong government withdrew the bill. But I think there's a big but. When Beijing knew that it couldn't impose Article 23, it changed tactics. That was when Apple Daily and there a lot of strange things happened at Apple Daily. First, it was the advertising boycott. It was around that time that the advertiser says, we have to choose some other platforms. Although Apple Daily was like the #1 newspaper, there's one thing that always makes me angry is when people call Apple Daily a tabloid. Can people stop calling Apple Daily tabloid? It is not a tabloid. We have serious economics column. I wrote that. It was not a tabloid. It was a serious newspaper. Come on. But then advertisers are like, okay, we cannot advertise with you because, you know, every day we got phone calls from someone from China telling us if you want to do business in China, you cannot advertise in Apple Daily. So we were a newspaper that hugely dependent on advertising. We have financial stress. Jimmy tried to innovate the newspaper. That was when I was like recruited and tried to reinvent ourselves. That was actually a positive driving force anyways. Advertising was changing, the internet was changing everything. So anyways, and then I want to remind us here that the suppression on press freedom in Hong Kong happened way before we remember it happened. In 2005, I remember, there was a Hong Kong journalist arrested in China. His name Cheng Cheng. He is now living in the West Coast. Cheng Cheng was jailed in China for 3 years for spying, but he was not even associated with any state actors anywhere. He was just a correspondent for a Singapore newspaper covering China. And it was about that time too. There are a lot more like Chinese so-called middlemen coming to Hong Kong, try to gather information, but in fact, these people are trying to send message to us. Some of those middlemen have coffee with me from time to time. I have to be honest. Like I tell them, the most influential paper in Hong Kong is our competitor, Oriental Daily. Just, you know, go after them, not us. But then, like, they don't believe me. What happened was they tried to influence the people who are influential in Hong Kong. If you look at how the Beijing government is dealing with Taiwan today, that is exactly what they are doing. Been there, done that. Another episode, it was never disclosed before, but I was acutely aware of the way Beijing deals with Hong Kong. In 2008, I was in charge of our IT. We installed a new server because we have this new like online news and animation and stuff like that. We installed a new computer server on our system, internal system. We forgot to put up the firewall for 15 minutes. And that server became a honeypot and in fact it became a Trojan horse. And our email system was infiltrated for probably 10 months until we discovered that. And over that 10 months, our email records were copied and taken away. Guess what? A few months after this incident, our competitor, Oriental Daily, and another competitor, Singtao, which were pro-Beijing, started to have this scoop on our staff's like personal affairs, like senior editors. Oh, it was real. One senior editor was dating another journalist, and you know the journalist was actually married, and these things were made public by our competitors. Guess who did that? I'm 100% sure it was not done by our competitors. Someone hacked into our system, built that Trojan horse. I can tell you, our cybersecurity team cybersecurity team is probably one of the best in town, because we were consistently under like this kind of attack since we have computers. Just 15 minutes of an oversight by a junior IT staff already caused such a big trouble. Okay, all these episodes seems like fragmented, but the point I'm trying to make is we have this candle analogy today, and don't watch the flame. The wick has been shortening, not only in Hong Kong, but all over the world. Today, I'm not trying to persuade the audience here from a moral and human rights point of view. It is realistic that the Beijing government sees everything as a threat. Hong Kong was a threat to Beijing. That's why Beijing wanted Article 23, wanted in 2002, they wanted in 2020. It was consistent, and Beijing's view of the United States is the same. Of course, it cannot impose national security law here, but they try to influence the public opinion. They try to have transnational oppression to silence journalists working on China's issue. They have multitude of tools and instruments, and it is not just what we see. I think what is more important is we have to look at the systemic approach, how Beijing exert the influence outside its jurisdiction. Hong Kong was first. It is going on elsewhere, all over the world. So I think I will leave it here.
Well, thanks very much. And it wasn't just Simon who was writing brilliant columns. It was Nobel Prize-winning economists. I mean, it really was a paper that had everything for everybody, I think. And I think you're right to go back to 2003. The demonstration against Article 23, which stopped it, had 500,000 people. It was an unprecedented demonstration in the post-1997 period. And it was primarily because of Jimmy and the team at Apple and the team at Next Magazine. And I think that's when Beijing said, this guy is dangerous. And fast forward to 2020, it was Apple and Next and many other publications that were getting millions of people out on the street. And so the newspaper and Jimmy, I think, had to be destroyed as effect. I don't think they've destroyed Jimmy. I don't think, we've got to remember there's 6 other colleagues from Apple Daily still in jail, who've been in jail for more than 4 years now. All have pled guilty, but are being held hostage to Jimmy's trial. So in the few minutes before the break, and yes, we are going to have a quick break, I'd like Tom to make a few remarks about how we might move forward. Some of the members spoke about the Hong Kong Judicial Sanctions Act. We've been working at the CFHK to try to hold judges and prosecutors accountable for the human rights violations. But this is an asymmetric warfare that we're waging here. We can't do. We can't free people in Hong Kong by going in there and sending in a SWAT team or anything like that. So we need to look at other measures to kind of move forward, keep the candle burning, keep the resistance going.
Can you hear me now? Okay, a couple of quick comments before we turn it back to Simon, who I'm sure will want to weigh in on this same question. One thing I certainly do hope will happen is that I hope that the administration will continue to weigh in on Jimmy Lai's case. Right, we are expecting a verdict, almost certainly, sadly, a guilty one, before the end of the year or in early 2026. The administration at very senior levels should condemn such an unjust verdict if, or perhaps I should say when, that happens. We also can see, and let me add, of course, that following the verdict, we will have a sentence. And I am deeply concerned that we may see a sentence of more than 10 years, going above and beyond even the draconian sentence handed down to Benny Tai in the Hong Kong 47 case. And as an older gentleman, I believe 77 now, who is in somewhat ill health, of course, a 10-year sentence or 10 years or more could be a life sentence for someone who has already served the better part of, I think, 5 years now behind bars. So the administration needs to be ready to respond to that verdict when it comes, and perhaps see this verdict, guilty as it almost certainly will be, as a moment of opportunity to start to press Beijing and Hong Kong for humanitarian parole and almost certain exile for Jimmy Lai outside of Hong Kong, if indeed he chooses himself to explore that option. All right. Many of us in this room are old enough to remember the 1990s, where we did have a series of very serious efforts by the U.S. government to push for the release of mainland Chinese political prisoners, yielding some successes of people going into exile here in the United States. Those could serve as a template for a very serious push on Jimmy Lai's case. One other quick point, if I may, which is to say, I think another issue that this administration should take more seriously is the issue of threats against U.S. citizens and residents here on U.S. soil, including members of the CFHK team. Right? When the Hong Kong government issues arrest warrants and bounties against foreign nationals, including U.S., UK, and Australian citizens, that is an affront to those countries' sovereignty. And this administration should not stand idly by as the Hong Kong government claims that it has the right to penalize, to punish, to imprison U.S. citizens or residents over their exercise of free speech, over their efforts to lobby their own government on human rights. That is simply unacceptable, and I hope this administration will continue to send a very stern message to both Hong Kong and Beijing on that front as well. Thank you. Simon, over to you.
Yeah, Simon, maybe you could just make some closing remarks, and especially let's look at the way forward. We've had 26 new media that have started since the crackdown. Most of them, of course, are diaspora media. Technology, of course, gives us opportunities that exiles in previous years in the Soviet East Bloc, Hungarian kind of period didn't have. How can we keep fighting, especially with the media and using different technologies?
I think sometimes when we deal with the CCP, because CCP sees everything as a warfare, everything is weaponized. They weaponize financial capability, they weaponize information, they weaponize everything. But to us, the normal people, the diaspora, we just want to live like a normal citizen. Hong Kong people, I'm a pacifist, come on. When we are trying to run a diaspora media, we just want to sometimes talk about things that we see. We want to keep the record straight. But this is exactly what CCP is doing. Even with the trial on Apple and Jimmy Lai, they are trying to rewrite history with the court record, so that this is exactly what they are doing. Through the trial, they rewrite history, but we are trying to record history and live on as a normal person, everyday life. To answer your question, Mark, I think the most important thing is we understand that they are trying to weaponize everything. And from my perspective, we try to normalize everything. I mean, we are just here today talking about what we see. As a journalist, we cover stories as a journalist will do. We run our overseas diaspora business network, because we have to make a living. I think that is very important. We cannot fall into CCP's like warfare mentality, but sometimes we have to get prepared for that. And now I think what is going on with Taiwan as well, I don't know if there are friends from Taiwan. I can see how Taiwanese society being like distorted because of that massive influence from Beijing, and Hong Kong experienced that. And from year 2003 all the way to now, actually Hong Kong has been under this distortion. And Hong Kong is the first, Taiwan is the next. Who knows when it comes to the United States or from a particular pocket of communities in the United States. So let's live a normal life as a normal person. That's my suggestion.
Thanks.
That is a radical suggestion.
That is a crime now.
Yeah. And I think it's especially true because the Hong Kong SAR government has a global messaging campaign to convince the international community that had a little trouble a few years ago, but everything is normal now, and this is obviously very repressed, forced normalcy. So I think we need to keep speaking the truth. We need to keep working in whatever way we can. Look, an olive branch is there. There's, as our chairman, Ambassador Cunningham, who's much more diplomatic than me, often points out, there is an off-ramp. If political prisoners are let out, there are ways that pressure could be eased on Hong Kong. But if not, we'll keep up the fight, keep up the pressure, and keep working with the support of all of you. I think we're going to take like a 2-minute break if people want to grab a coffee or pastry, but immediately come back, and Francis is going to keep things moving along. So thank you to the panelists.
Yeah, we'll restart. We'll take a brief break, and we'll restart at 11:25 sharp. So please come back promptly, and we can continue the discussion. Because we're restarting sharp in just 1 minute. So. Oh, thanks.
你哋嗰個 report 如果你想擺喺我度嘅話，咁我
哦，好啊，好啊。你係咪會留程？
應該會做少少。有咩可以幫手？
我一陣間，或者我可能揾日我攞俾你都得。
哦，
好啊，好，係嘛？Okay. Okay, we'll restart the program very soon. If you guys can wrap up those conversations and grab your seats, we'll restart. Okay, we'll begin our second panel. Where? Sam. All right. For our second panel, we will ask the question, can Hong Kong remain a global financial center while political prisoners are behind bars? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll start our second panel. I don't need to yell. As we ask the question, can Hong Kong remain a global financial center while political prisoners are behind bars and foreign firms are leaving the city? This panel is moderated by Carolyn Bartholomew, board member of the CFHK Foundation. With us is Samuel Bickett, who I've introduced earlier, and Jody Schneider, former Hong Kong-based senior editor at Bloomberg. Together, they will discuss Hong Kong's shifting economic climate, the rise in sanctions evasion, and what the future holds as rule of law erodes and political prisoners remain behind bars. Please welcome our panelist and moderator.
Thanks very much, and thank you to CFHK for pulling this together, for the staff for all of the hard work that they do. These things take an enormous amount of energy, so thank you for that, and thank you for including me in moderating this panel. We've had introductions. One thing about Sam I just want to note, of course, is that he's a stellar researcher and a lawyer, as well as his personal experience in prison in Hong Kong. And I'm not sure if anybody mentioned earlier today the New York Post piece that he just had over the weekend, which I commend to everybody who wants to understand what's happening to the political prisoners in Hong Kong, and acknowledge Jody's leadership on press freedom around the world. It's an important topic both for Hong Kong, but many places in the world, and so I really, in addition to all of your credentials with Bloomberg and all of that, your leadership on press freedom is really appreciated. You know, we've heard this morning about the decline of judicial independence, the decline of media freedom in Hong Kong, and the political prisoners. And so really what I want to do is, building on that context, ask, is it a good thing a good time for multinational corporations, for American businesses to be functioning in Hong Kong, and what are the risks associated with what they're doing. I'm going to give 5 minutes each to each of our panelists to talk, and then we'll have questions, and we'll hopefully have some time for questions from the audience. But why don't we go ahead and start, Sam, with you?
Thank you so much for coming, everyone, and for moderating this as well. I always appreciate seeing you, and I'm grateful for everything you do for this movement as well. I think it won't be news to anyone in here that Hong Kong is a city with two faces. On the one hand, you've got a city that every year now in November hosts a big conference where global CEOs of banks and financial institutions, their C-suites all come into Hong Kong. They hear a nice speech from the sanctioned chief executive, John Lee, and the financial secretary, Paul Chan. They talk about the investment they're going to do in Hong Kong over the next year and strategize, and then they go back. It's the city that's trying to invite the world to invest and connect with their financial system and make a lot of money together. The other face is the face that sends their senior leaders to meet with Russian officials, with officials in dictatorships in the Middle East, and tries to invite them to set up illicit types of businesses, to smuggle oil to North Korea, to smuggle weapons to Russia. We had a report out last year, for any who haven't seen it, on Hong Kong's role as the world's leading hub for export control evasion, to funnel weapons components to Russia, to funnel money and resources to North Korea, to get weapons components to Iran and get Iranian oil sold on the black market. And we have another report coming out later this year that focuses on Canada on the same topic, and Canadian manufacturers and how their products are getting out. We are also looking into doing something similar with respect to Europe. This is a global problem where democracies across the world should be paying attention. If anyone cares about the security issues with Russia, with Iran, with anywhere else, then they have to look at Hong Kong, because all roads are leading back to Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is a place that has two different things that they want people to see. And the key point there is that friendly face that they're showing to Westerners. A lot of Western business is gladly not looking below the surface. And they want to pretend that nothing is wrong. They want to pretend that when they go visit Hong Kong, that there's no political prisoners sitting down the street in tiny cells this size, suffering for fighting for democracy. They want to pretend that because, as there was an article just a couple of days ago showing, Hong Kong is now, once again, the world's leading place for IPOs. I used to be a corporate lawyer in Hong Kong. The corporate law firms right now are hugely busy. The banks are hugely busy. It's become a hot place once again, and there's money to be made there, and without a lot more pressure on some of these companies and financial firms, then that's not going to change.
Yep, thank you. Thank you for the introduction and for moderating, and for to all of you for being here. Even though the press freedom and press panel was the previous one, I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what I say, as I am a journalist. I'm now an independent journalist. I was with Bloomberg when I was in Hong Kong, and I was also president of the Foreign Correspondents Club at an interesting time, both when the protests happened in 2019, and then the institution or implementation of the national security law that took place July 1, 2020. And interestingly, while I was president during the year of the protests, there was still communication with the officials. We had a fair amount of communication with police officials because of the difficulties that press was having, that some of the members of the press were having, and some violence actually that occurred against members of the press in the protests. But there was an open door. There was an open door to the Hong Kong government and even the Chinese Foreign Ministry. They still called us in for tea in those days. But that changed really very abruptly, very markedly on July 1st, 2020. And when the Apple Daily newsroom was raided, and it was a raid, there were hundreds of police officers there in a working newsroom taking reporters' notes and things. It was a real raid. And Jimmy Lai and others were detained at that point. We wrote, of course, a statement or statements in criticizing these actions and in support of press freedom. And at that point, we were deemed an enemy of the government, which hadn't happened before. What we went ahead and did was posted those letters on our site and then responded and then posted the responses, and so all this was open, and that further angered the foreign ministry. At that point, it became not a we're inviting you in for tea, but phone calls and surveillance. So I think that I just wanted to make that clear from a press standpoint, just because personally I was involved in it, how it went from a pretty free place where even though the Chinese government was not often happy with things we would say, they allowed it. They sort of thought, all right, press freedom is something that, it's a veneer we at least have to show the world. And after July 1st, 2020, that changed. And I really agree with your comment on the two faces. I think from an economic standpoint, and I'm a financial journalist, that is exactly what is going on with the economy in Hong Kong right now. There is, the IPO market is hot. They're pushing cryptocurrency. There was just a major crypto conference there. But at the same time, they're having trouble retaining some of these multinational firms. Their offices are smaller than they used to be. And the facade of everything is fine has big holes in it. The property market remains strong, but there's all kinds of indications. Domestic consumption is low, and GDP has been growing after having contracted during the pandemic, but it is still growing very slowly. And there's all kinds of indications that this is, things are rocky, and how much longer they're going to be able to maintain this with not, the whole question is the independence in the judiciary and the rule of law. And if at some point that tips to being seen on the world stage as not protecting the businesses that are there, I think you will see a very different picture emerge. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I thought it would be helpful actually to take a step back at the beginning and ask you both about what role does Hong Kong play in China's economy, because this is not just individual business interests. There are strategies and tactics and important roles. So I wondered if you could both, maybe Jody, we'll start with you, reflect on why Hong Kong matters to China's bigger economic plans, and then Sam.
Well, certainly, before the national security law, and even now, part of it is that you have a currency, you have a free currency. It's pegged to the U.S. dollar. It doesn't move. You have a market that is seemingly open, and that investors worldwide can trust in. And you have a judiciary that, if you have a business dispute, you're not going to worry about it being decided even before you take it to the to whatever form you're taking it to. That has always been what allowed Hong Kong to become sort of a bastion of free markets and business and trust by multinational corporations. Of course, the real question is how much of that will continue going forward, and at what point is a tipping point. So I would say the market, and we were just talking about the IPO market. It's a place where China can say, look, we have bustling free markets, even as part of China. So I think that's a lot of it. It's also been a retail market, luxury goods and tourism that has declined in recent years.
I think Jody, you hit the points that I would as well on. That market peg or that currency peg is really important, and Hong Kong is quite committed to it, despite the strains that we're seeing. rule of law, as you touched on, is huge. We know that there is no longer rule of law with respect to criminal cases, particularly national security, but not just national security. But what you'll hear from a lot of business leaders is, oh, well, that's not true on the commercial side. There are some efforts underway to try to document why that's not the case, and there needs to be more. But for example, there have been a number of cases in the last several years where local competitive private firms, they're foreign, have had antitrust violations, investigations brought against them. A big one was with delivery services, so food delivery services. There was a big investigation brought into antitrust by Deliveroo and by Foodpanda, which are both foreign. Deliveroo ended up shutting down, and now you've seen the mainland Chinese firms come in and take over the vast majority of that market, and you're starting to see more things like that. So what I always say to businesses on that front is, do you really think, if you are, say, Apple, and you have a patent dispute with a Chinese protected company like Huawei, and you bring a lawsuit in Hong Kong courts or even in the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center, do you really think that you're going to get a fair hearing there with the pressure that some of these judges are under now? And finally, the last point I'll make on that is that from the Chinese government's view, I think that they view Hong Kong as a tool. It is a very important tool. They don't see it as a place with people really at all. And so the happiness of the Hong Kong people is essentially irrelevant to them. It is a very, very important financial tool that they see as a client state of the mainland market, and they will do whatever they need to do, whatever it takes to ensure that that stability remains. And that is, I think, a big motivator for what we saw in the crackdown in 2020 onward.
Thanks. Switching gears just a little bit. So multinational firms still operating in Hong Kong often argue that they can separate business operations from politics, but with sanctions evasion, political prisoners, and Beijing's control of the courts, is that separation still viable, or are these companies exposing themselves to significant legal, reputational, and compliance risks by staying? Sam, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, and I touched a little bit on that. I think that businesses in Hong Kong should be very aware that they are not really going to get a fair hearing. I mentioned how this happens through things like antitrust, through investigations. The Article 23 legislation now effectively allows the government to conduct warrantless raids on financial firms, on companies whenever they want to. And I think what you'll see, you're probably not going to see big flashy raids on Bank of America. What you're going to see instead is a quiet outreach to Bank of America or to Citibank or whoever else saying, you need to give us this stuff or we're going to raid you. And I think that these companies are going to do it because they want to be in that market. So you see through this, through anything else, you're seeing a lot more quiet pressure exposing important IP to the government and important competitive information to the government that these companies really shouldn't want to expose. With that said, for 40 years now, American companies, European companies have been more than happy to do business in mainland China. Now they put separations in place where they keep a lot of their most important IP out of mainland China and things like that. But they've, in a lot of cases, said, okay, the risk of us getting an unfair shake in courts in China is worth it to us. So it can be quite difficult to fight against that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's still a lot of some wishful thinking that we've been able to operate here. In '97 we worried what would happen, and we stayed, and it was fine. So I think that companies are doing that. I think they are separating things more than they used to. I think they're also in some cases. U.S. and Western companies are hiring more mainland folks to be their face there, both to deal with the Hong Kong and mainland authorities, but also so that they are at less risk themselves. I think there's also a fair bit of concern about looking at the judiciary. I know, still have friends who are in companies and work here with companies that have have a large presence in Hong Kong, and they say this is something that they're watching very closely in the political environment and what happens with these cases, including Jimmy Lai's, that this is something that, it could go bad very quickly. And so I think that there's a lot of attention to what could happen. And, but at the same time, there's a lot of money to be made. And particularly now, that the IPO market is hot, for instance, there's companies, want to get in on that.
One more point I'll add on that too is companies are really not putting enough consideration, which maybe not surprising for certain companies, into the safety of their employees. If you're sending over a bunch of American employees to Hong Kong, you're exposing them to becoming hostages, right? You can't really control what positions the U.S. government takes, what European governments take, and they will look and they will find citizens of whatever country they want to hurt, and they will hold them there.
Sam, it's interesting because I was just thinking of recent cases of business people not being allowed to leave the mainland, whether companies should be concerned that that could happen to their employees in Hong Kong too.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we think that's what happened in my case. Is I was arrested a couple weeks after the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act was passed, sanctioning officials. I highly doubt my case would have gone forward the way it did without that. And so you certainly see that. I think right now it's probably most likely with Brits and people from European countries, as and Australia, as they've shown a lot more willingness to openly bully and fight against those countries. But I think that might be shifting with respect to the United States as well. So anybody who asks me from a Western country, I always urge them to take that into account, that if they go to Hong Kong even for a visit, they might not be able to leave.
There's also a visa issue that we've seen more in the last few years. It used to be, you were working for a company that was in Hong Kong, you had, almost no trouble getting a visa. Now we're seeing that there was just a reporter at Bloomberg who did not get her visa renewed, which was pretty surprising. That hadn't written anything in particular that seemed to be, against the authorities, against the regime. And I know companies are facing that as well, including law firms, that they are looking much more carefully at who they give visas to, and in some cases denying them outright. Thank you.
So Tom in the previous panel mentioned some of the things that happened in the 1990s, and I was just remembering that there was, I think, at least one Wall Street Journal reporter who was arrested in the 1990s in the mainland for releasing information that was publicly available government information. I don't think enough people pay attention to the need for business to have access to accurate information in real time in order to do what businesses do. And I wondered if you could just reflect a little bit on how the crackdown on independent journalism might be affecting access to accurate information in real time.
Yeah, well, we like to believe that as journalists, that what we do matters in terms of, how the economy is conducted, how that free information, independent journalism, non-biased information that does not come from the government allows markets to allows markets to function effectively, and businesses to have the information they need to be able to do what they do, and the government as well. And obviously the curtailing of that in Hong Kong, I do think, has become problematic. We've seen a number of course, of major news organizations really limit their presence in Hong Kong. The New York Times operates its Asia operations, which were in Hong Kong, out of Seoul now. The Wall Street Journal Journal has really limited who they've left in Hong Kong. They've sent a lot of people to Singapore. We've seen that with the major news organizations. And there's a reason for that, because it's become difficult to get people to talk to you, even about things like the economy, where people used to be able to do that freely. So there's a lot less free flow of information in Hong Kong. And one would think that, well, you can't make a cause and effect argument necessarily, but that without that kind of information, particularly about the economy and finance and government, that would lead to, less ability to have trust in information that would allow the markets to function well.
I would just add on to that Article 23 legislation, a lot of the focus is on the criminal offenses like sedition in there, but it includes pretty comprehensive state secrets legislation that adopts the mainland definition effectively of state secrets. And what that means is any journalist, any corporation whose job it is to gather intelligence or gather information, even from public sources, trying to contact officials and get information from them, risks violating that law because it's incredibly vague, but it has a list of categories that includes, for example, economic information. So if you publish the economic information that later the government decides they really didn't want you to publish, they can charge you with state secrets violations there. And so are we likely to see that in a big splashy way? Maybe, maybe not. But what it absolutely is doing is it's chilling a lot of the previous inquiries that would have been made. So journalists may not reach out to officials at all or may not publish documents that they get. Officials themselves are really afraid to talk to journalists now or talk to sort of companies about some of the deals that they're doing. It's got a major chilling effect.
I'd like to add to that. Part of the issue with this is that these laws are opaque. What is the state secret? If you're
deliberately so.
Yeah, right. If you're doing your job as a journalist, you're going to be talking to people. They're going to be telling you things. You're going to be weighing those things. But if you read the law the way it is, just the very fact of compiling that information and asking those questions could be, could come under state secrets. But you don't know that until it's published. So I do think there was a deliberate chilling effect, certainly the intent to chill as part of these laws.
So does it turn out that these businesses don't need access to this information that they've been telling us all of these decades, that they do need access to this information, or do they think that they have their own inside sources and they're not so worried about getting it through a free and open media?
Yeah, as long as there's money to be made, let's face it, Hong Kong is going to be a place where businesses are going to be to make money, and I think they feel that, somewhat protected, perhaps in a way, and maybe, it's a little convenient, this belief right now, but I do think, and also these are major corporations that do have their own business modeling and other things. So I think right now, as long as the markets remain ostensibly free and open, and the Hong Kong peg is there, and there's money to be made, that will happen. But I do think that, again, it could turn very quickly.
I mean, everything in their analyses is a risk analysis, and we think that the analysis of risk that a lot of these businesses have right now is a misperception. We think their risk is higher than they think it is, and a lot of what we need to do with business is try to get them to move that risk needle and understand what they're facing there. And it's all really frustrating because the business community there is probably the only community that has the ability to get the Hong Kong government to reverse course on some of the things that they're doing at this point. We know that because they did it once, and they've only done it a single time since 2020. Mainland China passed what they call a sanctions blocking law that essentially made it illegal for a company, including a foreign company, to enforce U.S., European sanctions while in China. The Hong Kong government was going to adopt it in Hong Kong. The business community, financial firms, foreign financial firms came together and said, if you do this, we can no longer do business in Hong Kong because we have to comply with Western sanctions. And the government backed off of it. It's the only time we've seen that. The ability of the business community to put their foot down and say, you know, if you continue this national security crackdown, if you continue with this state secret stuff, we will leave Hong Kong, but they don't do it. And we really got to push to change that risk calculation for them.
Thanks. All right. So Western governments have sanctioned dozens of Chinese and Russian companies for sanctions evasion, but Hong Kong entities often escape direct penalties. What are the risks of continuing to leave Hong Kong out of the entity designations, and what steps would you recommend to close that gap? Sam, I think we'll turn it to you.
Sorry, can you say that one more time? I missed a little bit of it.
Yes, it is about the risks of continuing to leave Hong Kong out of entity designations on sanctions, and what steps would you recommend to close that gap?
So we need, on sanctions, right? So there are two types of sanctions. There's jurisdiction-based sanctions, and there are individual sanctions. There's a couple of things that are a problem here. Now, we can't convince even the United States, which is pretty relatively gung-ho on these issues, we can't convince them to issue jurisdictional sanctions on Hong Kong. It would kill Hong Kong's access to the global financial system, and it's a step so far that's just too far even for the U.S. So there's a couple of approaches there. Number one is individual and entity designations, which we've had some progress on with human rights, but pretty minimal there, where we've got some human rights sanctions against a few officials. There needs to be a lot more, but more progress around Hong Kong's efforts in funding the Russian war, funding Iran, or funding North Korea, and getting entities, trade companies designated there. The system in the United States, however, is broken on that. It's broken in Europe as well. It's way too slow. It's very easy for these companies to shift assets and shift their business once they get designated. So there's a big push to try to increase the funding for the Bureau of Industry and Security in the United States. There is some money set aside for that in the budget this year, but there needs to be a lot more. I think the administration has asked for, what, 100 million or billion or something, but the administration has asked for a lot more than the current bill is willing to give BIS to try to increase the number of people working on this. We've got to get that number up, because BIS right now has a tiny, tiny handful of people who are responsible for tracking sanctions evasion across the entire world. They need, 100, 200 people who are doing this every day, and a much more rapid pace of sanctions. Now, the second thing, we can't do entity designations, but there is a bill pending, it was mentioned earlier by the congressman, that would designate Hong Kong as a primary money laundering concern. What this would do is it wouldn't cut Hong Kong off of the global financial system, but it would at least require U.S. banks, including correspondent banks that transfer, that exchange U.S. dollars with Hong Kong. It would require them to do more due diligence on the clients that they're doing this for, to make sure that there's no sanctions evasion going on, to make sure that there's no human rights violations going on, and it would be a really big step in trying to rein in some of this behavior.
Great, thanks. And when you mention individual sanctions, I can't let slip the fact that a number of us in this room have been sanctioned by Beijing, me actually twice, which is kind of yeah, nobody could understand the second time. Because the name was out there and it was just did it. But anyway, it's certainly something that some of us have learned to live with. I'd like to open up to the audience if there are any questions for a few minutes. If not, I have a question or two to follow up. Francis, we have somebody with a microphone who can, sorry, I should have prepped this better. Great.
If you have a question, you can start with introducing your name and affiliation, and keep it a question.
My name is Sophie Luo. I am founding a new organization, Alliance for Citizenship. I am the wife of political prisoner Ding Jiaxi. My question is, do you have a name or anyone working on the people who will ban in Hong Kong, do not allow the going out? Because my organization is working on a reporting regarding the people put into the border control using the excuse as national security. So in China, many people were blocked going abroad using endangering the country's safety. I don't know in Hong Kong, is any people working on it, or do you have a list of people who are under control like this?
It's quite tricky in Hong Kong. So first of all, in the mainland, they have a bar on leaving for things like civil cases. So if you're not suspected of a crime, but somebody's accused you of, in a civil dispute, a contract dispute, they can bar you from leaving, and that's a big problem. We haven't really seen that in Hong Kong yet. And frankly, I mean, I wouldn't put anything past these people. They constantly surprise me, but it would be an incredibly stupid thing for them to do if they're trying to attract business to Hong Kong, to start to barring people with commercial disputes. On the criminal side, though, the reason it's tricky is, you really have to speak to individual people. So once people are getting out of prison, we know that certain prisoners, former prisoners, are being barred from leaving Hong Kong on national security grounds. We know that others are being permitted to leave. We don't know exactly the standard that they're using to do that. So there's kind of a range going on now. So we don't have a list. We probably wouldn't want to create that list because it's quite a sensitive topic, right? So when people are there, we don't want them to be retaliated against further when they're already being kept from leaving Hong Kong. But it is absolutely a problem in Hong Kong for particularly people getting out of prison, not being able to leave.
All right. Any other questions in the audience? Yes, Sheridan.
Hi, thank you. I'm Sheridan Praso from Bloomberg. I'd like to follow up on the issue of sanctions, targeted sanctions against particular Hong Kong officials, and also the placing of certain Chinese or Hong Kong entities on the BIS list. And what do we know has been the result of that? Previously we thought you just put them on the list and they'll change their address or change, their designation in some way, but keep operating. Has there been any measured impact that we can see from either of those measures?
BIS last year they started putting addresses. So it's what that's designed to do is target corporate services companies. And I don't want to get into too much technical detail here, but basically most of these companies in Hong Kong, their official address is not their physical address. Their official address is a corporate services company. This exists in Delaware and other places too. It's not that uncommon, but it creates a bit of a front for them. So what BIS was finding and what we found in some of our investigation is that certain corporate services companies have a whole lot of sanctions evader company clients. And so BIS started putting the addresses of those corporate services companies, which are the official addresses of these companies. So you'd have a list, you'd have 20 companies, and they'd have all have the same official address, even though obviously none of those companies are really there. So they started designating that. I told BIS this, and I'll tell you, I don't think it does much. There are a whole lot of corporate services companies. They can switch to another corporate services company in a couple of days. What we really are pushing for and what we really need to see is we need to see them to sanction a bank. Trade finance requires banks. If you're shipping a bunch of goods abroad, in multiple currencies involved, you've got to have a lender. And we don't need to see HSBC or China Construction Bank, these massive banks necessarily sanctioned. And the pushback we get on that is that there would be a huge impact, ripple impact across the world. But there are smaller regional banks. And look, as somebody who used to advise Asian banks on sanctions, if you sanction the tiniest bank in Hong Kong for trade finance violations, then every single other bank will get in line within days. They will put money into compliance and they will stop it. Bank of China, China Construction Bank won't tell you that they're doing that, but they will. They will comply with the sanctions if they feel like they're going to be targeted.
One final question from me, and that is, as Hong Kong is sort of increasingly indistinguishable from mainland China, both in how judiciary and media is happening, but also how the U.S. is treating Hong Kong as indistinguishable in export controls and sanctions. What does the future look like for Hong Kong as a financial center? And should global businesses start planning their exit strategies? Or do you think that there's still a window for risk-managed engagement? Jody?
Well, I do think, as we've been discussing here, that companies are, in U.S. as well as Western companies, are banking on there being a way to continue to operate in Hong Kong. And we've talked about the risks, but there's still a lot of money to be made there. So from a journalist standpoint, looking at it, financial journalists, I think companies will try to find a way to continue to operate there as long as they can. I do want to end on one somewhat optimistic note, and this was mentioned in the previous panel. There have been, as media companies have exited and as they've been exited, as they've been shut down, there have been some new ones that have started, some new independent ones, and I think that's a really good sign. These are brave people. They are, operating in an environment, as we saw the latest ranking for press freedom in Hong Kong is 140 out of 180. And, North Korea is more in their neighborhood than other countries. It used to be, at one point, it was in the mid-30s. In the early 2000s, it was 73 in 2019. So obviously, it is not a bastion of press freedom now, but there are companies and there are independent organizations that are saying it's important, it's really important that we report freely in Hong Kong, and I'm very heartened to see that.
I would say this is, I think there's a common view that Beijing wants to see Hong Kong become indistinguishable from the mainland. I don't actually think that's true. What Beijing wants is for Hong Kong to be operating somewhat on its own in order to allow for business to come in and still be perceived as separate, to keep that separate operation. But they want to do that while quietly controlling the city. So they want the perception of autonomy while having quiet control. I think in 2487, if things keep going the way they will still maintain some level of a separate system there. Because they like that. They like that perception. The way that we're going to actually get any return to meaningful autonomy is if the global business community, if global governments keep pushing on the point that there is no meaningful autonomy now. Because everything that really matters, China can and often does step in to stop it. So pushing on that perception and why it's wrong is I think really important here to trying to see some restoration of autonomy. Is it a bit of a pipe dream? Maybe, but we keep pushing forward and hope for something.
Yeah, and the importance, I think, of organizations like CFHK and other organizations in keeping focus on individuals who are political prisoners, that there is a legal responsibility and a moral responsibility to obtain their freedom, and frankly, to hold businesses accountable for what is happening to the people of Hong Kong. So thank you very much. I think we're ending right on time. Thank you for appearing on the panel.
Thanks, Carolyn, for moderating this such great panel. We've just explored the reality of that Hong Kong puts itself through in failing its status as a global financial center. Our next segment turns to an issue that reaches beyond Hong Kong's financial market, that touches communities across the United States, the outreach activities associated with the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area, also known as GBA. I would like to welcome my colleague Shannon Vincent back to the stage to walk us through the key findings of a report that CFHK Foundation published a few months ago on this topic. Shannon. Please welcome Shannon.
Thank you, Francis. As Francis introduced, earlier this year, the Foundation published a report I authored on overtures from Hong Kong's Greater Bay Area. Should I try this? Okay, this might be better. Earlier this year, the Foundation published a report I authored on overtures from Hong Kong's Greater Bay Area to San Francisco and the Chinese Communist Party's subnational diplomacy efforts in the United States. It's an issue I had been researching for several years. Beijing's efforts to cultivate relationships with local US officials are an intentional effort to bypass fraught relations at the federal level and engage directly with American political leaders at the state, county, and city level. These engagements have undermined US federal policy to hold Hong Kong officials accountable for the crackdown on democracy and human rights. Beijing is using Hong Kong's Greater Bay Area as a tool of influence and propaganda to draw investment, entrepreneurs, and tourists to Hong Kong. After years of harsh COVID restrictions and Beijing's crackdown on democracy, the CCP's promotion of the Greater Bay Area projects to the world that Hong Kong is back to business again as a gateway to mainland China. The Hong Kong Economic and Trade Offices also use the Greater Bay Area to facilitate investment and technology partnerships on the subnational level in the United States and also around the world. So what is the Greater Bay Area? The Greater Bay Area encompasses Hong Kong, Macau, and 9 cities in Guangdong province, including Shenzhen, which is home to China's technology giants such as Huawei, DJI, ZTE, and Tencent. Beijing seeks to transform the Greater Bay Area into a global hub of innovation that can rival the United States' Silicon Valley. It is also said that the Greater Bay Area's investments in high technology must advance development of China's People's Liberation Army. So why is Hong Kong reaching out to San Francisco? The overtures from Hong Kong's Greater Bay Area to San Francisco are purposeful. As the world's global hub of innovation, Silicon Valley plays a significant role in US-China technology competition. Promotion of closer ties between Hong Kong and San Francisco are coordinated by China's central government and can be seen across Chinese state media. From Beijing's perspective, San Francisco is an important region to partner with as China strives to learn from the United States and from US entrepreneurs and hone its technology transfer efforts, with the goal of developing Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area into a rival hub that the CCP wants someday to surpass San Francisco and the United States. Why is Hong Kong developing relationships with local US leaders? Hong Kong's subnational diplomacy efforts enable it to build a groundswell of support among local leaders in the US for agendas that benefit the CCP. And through twinning Hong Kong's Greater Bay and the San Francisco Bay areas, similar to a sister city program, Beijing is able to strengthen its networks of influence in the United States. These subnational engagement efforts at relationship building on the local level elude transparency, national scrutiny, and with the disintegration of local US news outlets, reporting on by the press. Beijing knows that today's local officials are tomorrow's national leaders, and that is why they cultivate relationships with influential individuals over the long term. China has brought Silicon Valley mayors to Hong Kong for all expense-paid trips. These trips expose them to spotting and assessing opportunities by the CCP and show them only one side of the China story. During these trips, Chinese state media have also promoted reports about discussions of possible technology partnerships with the mayors from Silicon Valley, and this reflects the CCP goal for their subnational engagements with the United States. It's important to look at the role of the central government and an organization called the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries in these engagements. China's central government has conceived the development of Hong Kong's Greater Bay Area into a technology powerhouse, and it has also developed the strategy around Hong Kong's overtures to San Francisco. China's promotion of a Bay-to-Bay relationship has been visible and orchestrated across state media organizations at the central and provincial level, United Front entities, and local subnational lobbying efforts in the United States. The Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries plays a primary role in these subnational diplomacy efforts. CPA-FFC is a key political influence organization of the United Front, which aims to strengthen the rule of the CCP and control and mobilize people to support the party's goals. It is overseen by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and coordinates China's subnational diplomacy and sister city agreements. The association also sponsors conferences in the United States connecting Chinese leaders with US governors, mayors, and state and local legislators, and has used these events to try and rally US local officials against federal policies that China opposes. It's important also to keep in mind that there isn't reciprocity. Beijing does not allow it, so America's leaders are not permitted to bypass China's central government to build relationships directly with local constituencies in China. This creates an asymmetry in US-China engagement favoring the CCP. So what should local officials do in response? Narratives have power, and China knows that. And through the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, China determines the agenda and narratives it wishes to communicate at the subnational level. In its subnational efforts, the CCP aims to build support for its goals and establish leverage in its relationship with the United States. So American state and local officials should go into these engagements with their eyes wide open and armed with their own clearly defined narratives and agendas which reflect US values, principles, and long-term strategic interest. This should include advocating for the release of Hong Kong's political prisoners and giving advocacy for human rights and democracy equal weight to boosting trade and investment ties. That's it. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. As you might have noticed, Jimmy Lai's name has been brought up many times during this symposium, and we all know the reasons behind it. He is now one of the oldest political prisoners in Hong Kong, and he has been kept in solitary confinement for as long as his trial has begun. His health conditions has been raising international concerns, and at this point, I'm sure many of you would like to know more about his story and his situation. So I would like to introduce CFHK's Foundation's President, Mark Clifford, and the author of Jimmy Lai's biography, The Troublemaker, to say a few words.
I'm kind of honestly the filler until young Kim comes, but so I'll stop as soon as she comes. Got to be honest here. If we could get a picture of Jimmy, or one of those pictures from before, would be great. I don't know if we can. So Jimmy Lai is, he's important. I mean, in the sense that he's probably the world's best known, or certainly China's best known political prisoner. We can't forget about the other 800 people in jail. Chris Smith, I think, spoke very eloquently about that. I mean, Jimmy is, I guess, first among equals because of his international prominence, his wealth, and above all, his willingness to really to go to the mat for his principles. I've known Jimmy since 1993. I was on the board of Next Digital when it was destroyed, crushed by the government. And so I've got to see him really close up. But it wasn't until I wrote this biography that I realized what an extraordinary individual he was. I mean, I knew he was a great guy. He's a good guy. But in going back and trying to look at the whole trajectory of this 77-year life, I just was both so staggered by his commitment to freedom and so heartbroken by what Hong Kong has done to a guy who was one of the greatest entrepreneurs of his generation. And that was news to me, even having known Jimmy for 3 decades and been on his board. So let me just talk, because again, his name comes up all the time, and you know him as, this is the last picture that we've seen of him. And I think, as it was alluded to before, the Associated Press photographer who took this picture, Louise Lamott, was later thrown out of the country. Jimmy himself, I understand, was punished because this picture, which obviously he had nothing to do with, was taken. Jimmy was born into a fairly prosperous family in China 2 years before the Maoist Revolution, and the family was scattered to the winds, really was shattered by the Maoist Revolution and its aftermath. His mother was sent to a labor camp, humiliated, made to kneel on glass, wear a dunce's cap. The family suffered during the Great Leap Forward and the famine that killed as many as 45 million people in China. Jimmy, his mother gave him permission to go to Hong Kong when he was 12, or try to get to Hong Kong when he was 12 and a half. You think of what mother is going to let a 12-year-old undertake a dangerous illegal voyage to Hong Kong, as in a smuggler's boat. The first night there, he slept on a factory floor. 15 years later, he owned a factory. I mean, it's an incredible story of rags to riches. And again, when I, just knowing Jimmy over the years, I figured he was just one of 1,000, one of 10,000, one of so many people in Hong Kong who'd made it big. So he owned this factory. He set up he took control in 1976. 5 years later, it was the biggest sweater maker in Hong Kong, if not in Asia. He was selling to companies like the Limited. He was the first guy. He had all these pioneering innovations. He was just an extraordinary businessman. He would charter 747s to fly sweaters to the Limited's headquarters in Columbus, Ohio. Nobody had done that before. They used to put it on a ship, and by the time it got there, hope that there was still a market for it. So he radically shrunk lead times, cut working capital. I had people at the Limited tell me I bought my first house off this guy's sweater because he made so much money off Jimmy's innovations. I'm sure many of you know the Japanese clothing company Uniqlo. Actually, a lot of you are probably wearing their clothes, if not today, on the weekends. The founder of Uniqlo came down to learn from Jimmy and from Jimmy was like a kind of godfather of fast fashion. When he got bored with just making sweaters, he went into retail for himself, for Giordano. And in fact, and it was Simon Lee who first told me this, Jimmy was about to go into the Chinese fast food business and kind of do for fast food what he'd done for fast fashion. And then came Tiananmen, and he was just so heartbroken. It changed his life. He took proceeds from selling T-shirts and sent them up to the students, sent tents up there. And he thought that media and transparency would open the way to change. And he founded Next Magazine. He had no experience in media, none. He said, hey, I read The Economist, I read Fortune, I read Time. How hard can this be? And he quickly had one of the most popular magazines in Hong Kong. The government went after him, tried to get him to back off, put pressure on Giordano, closed down, talk about political risk for business, closed down their operation in Beijing. Jimmy said, forget it. He sold his Giordano stake for $200 million, plowed the money into Apple Daily. And as we heard on the earlier panel, starting in 2003, when Apple and Jimmy and Next were responsible for getting many of those 500,000 people out on the streets, and then were responsible for, helping, I would say, channel Hong Kong's people's aspirations. It wasn't Jimmy as some kind of ringleader. It was Jimmy as a catalyst, as a facilitator. And for that, he's been in jail, mostly in solitary confinement, for more than 1,700 days. He's a guy who I think is unique in Chinese history. I don't think the CCP has ever come across somebody with Jimmy's characteristics.
he's wealthy, so that's given him, gave him an international platform and network. He's a media owner. We know what the CCP thinks of media and the importance of controlling it. And I think perhaps most important, he's a man with principles who's willing to suffer, even at the cost of his life, I think, to tell the truth about the Chinese communist oppression of Hong Kong. So I feel, just fortunate and humbled to know him. I look forward to the day when he's out of prison and we can celebrate together. And if you're interested, we do have copies. We're not selling them, we're giving them away, but there's a lot more in this biography, which was a real labor of love, but as I said, I ended up with so much appreciation for this unique man. But again, in closing, he stands for the other 800 people who are in prison, and really for the 7.5 million Hong Kongers who are not living the free life that they were promised and that they deserve. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Our next panel will focus on strengthening U.S. policy tools to promote freedom and human rights in China and beyond, including how we can bolster initiatives like RFA and other democratic efforts. Moderating this panel is Jonathan Stivers, the U.S. Director of CFHK Foundation, joined by Kelly Curry, non-resident Senior Fellow at Atlantic Council, and Olivia Enos, Senior Fellow at Hudson Institute. Please welcome our panelists and our moderator.
Hello. Thank you all for being here for our third and final panel today. Last week, Chinese Communist Party General Secretary Xi Jinping convened a grand military parade in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. With him, he had Russian President Vladimir Putin, North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un, and also in prominent attendance were leaders from Iran, Belarus, and the chief of Burma's military junta. One outside observer, our friend Benedict Rogers, called this the Davos of dictators. In this highly choreographed display of symbolism, these dictators were sending a message to the U.S. and the world that they're unified and ready to push back on the U.S. and our allies and partners. So it's in this dangerous context that we turn to broader U.S. policy. For decades, the U.S. Congress has really been the bedrock of support for human rights and democracy. We've provided, I always say we because I served in Congress for so long as a staffer, but so many resources and authorities have been provided to the executive branch over decades, and it really has come from the Congress, which has been the foundation of support for administrations, both Republican and Democrats, which haven't always been as strong on these issues as Congress has been. But these initiatives have been essential in countering and competing with the Chinese Communist Party on their government propaganda and malign influence in China and around the world. So in the last 6 months, we've really seen tectonic shifts in U.S. policy, and not in a positive direction. There have been efforts to undermine the National Endowment for Democracy, Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, and the State Department's Bureau for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. USAID's democracy and governance programs have been completely dismantled. So at a time when the U.S. should be doubling down on support for democracy and freedom, we're pulling back. There is a better way forward. And I'm so glad to have two of the foremost experts on U.S. policy on human rights and democracy here with us today to talk about what the U.S. and the international community should be doing. So with us, we have my good friend, Kelly Curry. She's been a foreign policy and human rights leader in Washington, D.C. for 3 decades. I think I've known Kelly for at least 25 years of that 3 decades.
Very young when he started as a child. He started in elementary school, right?
We were all children back in those days and incredibly idealistic and naive. We've seen a lot, that's for sure. She's currently the non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Ambassador Curry was the U.S. representative to the UN Economic and Social Council, an alternative representative to the UN General Assembly, along with serving as ambassador at large for global women's issues in the first Trump administration. That's a lot to say. A lot of titles.
The longer your title in Washington, the less important.
That's definitely not true in your case, but before that, she was a senior fellow at the Project 2049 Institute and held senior positions in the administration, Congress, and the non-governmental organizations. We also have with us my other good friend, Olivia Enos. She's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where she specializes in human rights and national security issues in Asia. She also serves as an adjunct professor at Georgetown, where she teaches a course, which I'd like to take, on countering authoritarianism in Asia. And prior to that, and most important, of course, she served as the Washington director for our organization, the CFHK Foundation. And she spent nearly a decade in the Asia Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. So thank you both for being with us today. Let's start with a few minutes from Ambassador Curry, followed by Ms. Enos, and then we can have a discussion about what the U.S. should be doing to support freedom and human rights globally.
Thank you, John. There we go. Thank you for that deeply embarrassing introduction. It is nice to see others who I have a long acquaintance with in this audience and people who I've worked with for many, many years in the trenches on these issues. So I want to start out by talking about kind of try to table set or level set where we are at the moment in this crazy situation that we find ourselves in. And I think that we have to start by being a little bit honest that the situation on January 20th with regard to U.S. support for human rights in China was not wonderful, and there were problems. And so romanticizing the status quo ante doesn't help, but I want to point out a couple of things that were problematic that I was dealing with in various roles that I was in, both in the previous administration as well as since I left the last administration, or the first Trump administration, I should say. One is that, a lot of stuff was getting funded that really wasn't good programming. Bad programming was getting funded, and it, and so it was like shooting fish in a barrel when it came to identifying problematic programs across the foreign assistance budget. And so they're setting the narrative by identifying, pointing out those problems. And I will say that some of the worst things that I was aware of before January didn't even get brought up. And so there were real problems. And there were people working inside these agencies who did not see themselves as accountable to the American taxpayer, who did not believe that they were accountable to U.S. foreign policy and national security policy, and they saw themselves as activists doing programming, and that was a problem. It set a precedent that is not great. Then the other thing that I think was really worrying and problematic was the excess dependency on the United States for funding in this area. There was almost no other donor working in support of these activities. And that is an unhealthy, deeply unsustainable situation. And it created a lot of bad incentive structures, and it was not a healthy ecosystem. Again, part of this was others, a lot of this was due to other donors pulling back. There was some crowding out by U.S. funding, but most of it was due to others pulling back out of cowardice and, or for whatever reasons, but it just was not sustainable. So since January, I think the biggest challenge that we have is that Congress has failed to meet this moment. And look, I get that it's hard because it's been a lot. They've moved fast and taken and broken things and broken norms, and seem quite proud of doing so. But Congress is really, at the end of the day, the only entity that has standing under Article 1 to fight back against this. And if they're not going to fight back, there is not. There are limits to what can be done. to protect the decades of work of ecosystem that has been built up, the support for critical frontline organizations, and all the incredible work that many people in this room do, and really, you know, have done for decades. So I'm gonna pop up with it. Well, I'll stop there. I'll stop there, and then I've got some thoughts about how Congress can start to take some very specific steps that seem very doable to me. But we can get to that after next.
Sounds good. Thank you. Olivia.
Awesome. Many thanks to you, John, and to CFHK for convening this really important discussion at a very critical moment in time. I have a lot of material I want to cover. I'm going to try to move through it as quickly as possible. But, you know, this is an incredibly critical moment because there are some in Washington who are trying to reshape the contours of the discussion around universal human rights and how those are advanced through U.S. foreign policy. Thank goodness their views are not representative of the main. For every single individual, I believe that the desire for freedom truly beats in the heart of every single man. And it is for that I have incredible hope. At this present moment, the U.S. is facing immense threats from all around the globe, but especially from the CCP. And I would argue that the U.S. is leaving incredibly valuable leverage on the table when it does not proactively lead in defending human rights. In fact, to ignore human rights is to undermine U.S. national security and economic priorities. Defending human rights is not only the right thing to do, it's also the strategic thing to do, because authoritarians share one thing in common: all violate human rights to maintain their grip on power. And violating rights is central to achieving their mission and essential to carrying out threats to U.S. interests. The CCP in particular violates the human rights of Uyghurs, of Hong Kongers, Tibetans, Christians, Falun Gong, dissidents, human rights activists, human rights lawyers, because the party falsely believes that they pose a threat to its core foreign policy goals of first, maintaining internal stability, and second, safeguarding sovereignty. Of course, the CCP is wrong, but that does not stop them from carrying out ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity against Uyghurs, undermining freedom overnight in Hong Kong, and extrajudicially imprisoning anyone the CCP falsely labels as a threat. This is my core heart of my argument, so if you leave and hear nothing else today, it's this: if the CCP views the violation of human rights as central to achieving its foreign policy goals, then the U.S. cannot treat these issues as peripheral or unimportant. That's precisely why the current administration's approach leaves me very concerned, because it's undermining the very tools that the U.S. has historically relied on to safeguard and defend human rights and freedom. We see this through the undercutting of DRL and of USAID, the undermining of information access efforts through Radio Free Asia, poor decisions to misdirect the U.S. refugee program away from refugee resettlement and towards deportation, and the proposed cuts to DRL grants that will affect many of the organizations that are represented in this room. But this is not the end of the story, because those in power will soon find that the U.S. is weaker when we don't defend human rights, because now is the time for Congress, for the private sector, for civil society, and for individuals to be bold, as we ask Congress and the executive branch to hear our concerns and the impact that their decisions are already having on the very people that we're trying to defend. To right the ship and to lead effectively, we need a bright vision for the future. But before we can identify some of those next steps, I just wanted to very briefly address a couple of different groups of people in particular. As a conservative, to fellow conservatives, we have to reclaim what is good. Reagan understood what few others do, that the U.S. is strongest when we have a strong national defense and a strong arsenal of tools to defend human rights and freedom. We were victorious in the Cold War because of it. We can be victorious now if and only if we remind leadership and the American people that what makes the U.S. special is our belief in the inherent value of every person and the decision to turn that belief into action. To my liberal friends, the current administration has sought to undermine the bipartisanship that has made efforts to defend human rights so successful in the past. We must resist that urge with all of our might by retaining friendships, maintaining open lines of communication, and by working together to craft effective policy for the peoples we seek to defend. Since we're on Capitol Hill, I would be remiss if I did not also address Congress. We need bold leaders to speak up in defense of human rights and freedom, especially across China. We need your bipartisanship. You have historically led, as John rightfully suggested at the beginning, in the U.S. government's defense of human rights. Please don't lose sight of that leadership now, especially not at this critical moment. So, where do we go from here? As we rebuild after this past year, we have to keep the main things in view. We do this work to advance the best policies to defend the very real people affected by the CCP. Folks like Jimmy Lai, which we just heard Mark talking about, Gulshan Abbas, who today it's the 7-year anniversary of her detention, the Panchen Lama, Pastor Wang Yi, and so many others. As many of the tools we used to use to advance their causes are being undermined, we must look for ways to rebuild those things that are essential and that worked, but also be honest about the things that did not and build anew. We should press Congress and the administration to advance policies that seek to shift the balance of power across China away from the CCP and towards the people. And the practical means of doing so include, but are not limited to, first, establishing an Office of Political Prisoner Advocacy and appointing a special envoy for political prisoner advocacy at the U.S. Department of State. Second, supporting, not undermining, Radio Free Asia and other funding mechanisms that promote information access across China. 3, sharpening tools to address transnational repression and to provide relief to individuals that face that persecution. Third, sharpening traditional national security tools for human rights ends, like sanctions, the rebuttable presumption, primary money laundering concerns, and so many others. Fourth, reforming the U.S. refugee program to ensure swift resettlement, thorough vetting, and a variety of mechanisms that enable refugees and asylees to be settled safely in the U.S., not having to wait 10 years for their claims to be fully resolved. And then sixth and finally, the U.S. government should preserve the funding for DRL grants for many of the organizations that are represented in this room who are doing some of the most critical work to advance all of these policy priorities. So I'll end it there, but sorry, John, I know that's a little more than 5 minutes.
That's great. Thank you, Olivia. So I want to drill down on 2 entities that have been absolutely critical in pushing back on China and supporting human rights and democracy globally, and that's the National Endowment for Democracy and Radio Free Asia. We have the people in this room I know about these entities. They're experts in them, but this is being live streamed. We have a larger audience that we're trying to reach. So Kelly, you've worked very closely with NED over the years. You served on their board. Can you talk about why NED is so important in pushing for human rights and democracy globally and in China in particular? And then Olivia, can you talk about Radio Free Asia and why that is so important and why Congress and the administration really need to get their act together and support those 2 entities?
Yeah, I mean, look, when I talk about the ecosystem of funders and the donors that have been absolutely critical in doing the quiet and needful things, NED is at the top of that list. Before DRL had a single program, NED was there working inside China, working with communities, with Tibetans, with Uyghurs, with Hong Kongers, and with the Chinese democracy movement for decades, and has been stalwart and has deep ties with these communities, has a deep knowledge and understanding and deep history of how and has ways to do things that are unique and historically have been very effective in terms of getting support to groups that otherwise would not be able to get support. That little penumbra of separation from the United States government, that yes, NED gets 99% of its funding from the United States government, but because it is separate from the administration, it is separate from the executive branch, it does have that ability to operate in a way that is looking across the long-term goals of U.S. foreign policy, not this administration's goals or that administration's goals, but the fundamentals. And I think that this is the key, right? I mean, when we think about, I'm going to back up a little bit, because I think that one of the things that we are seeing, and we've seen this, just over time, over at least my time in Washington, every administration comes in with different human rights priorities, or some human rights priorities or whatever, different foreign policy priorities. Every administration comes in and, certain things that were being pursued by the prior administration flip over and are deprioritized, and other things are prioritized. The thing that Ned was able to do that was special historically was be steady in terms of sticking with the core of that, that idea of the United States that Reagan talked about, city on the hill, that has always been, that we have an obligation, the Westminster speech with Margaret Thatcher, that, when others are fighting for democracy, the United States should be their friend. And that, while that is deeply embedded in the American character, I think, and in kind of the long arc of our foreign policy, it is not present in the day-to-day operation of foreign policy. Anybody who's ever worked in the executive branch at the State Department or in the National Security Council can tell you that human rights and the idea of supporting people fighting for democracy is not front and center in American foreign policy making. I hope this is not a shock to anybody in this room. But Ned has allowed that has been that kind of through line. I think that because this, and again, I don't think we do ourselves any favor by trying to be cute about things. Democracy assistance involves meddling in other countries' political affairs. And therefore, it is a tough thing to do in a way that is effective, that is not tainted by the agendas of the United States or other donors who support it, and that is kind of principled. It is not an easy thing to do, and by and large, I think Ned has successfully, and the core institutes have successfully managed to do that. And with China, because of the kind of arc of U.S. foreign policy with China, it has always been a very big challenge. And so I think that, but Ned has managed to navigate that challenge very well. Unfortunately, I think that because it does involve, because Ned funds work and its core institutes and its grantees are doing politics in other countries, it does put a target on their back, and it's historically there has been a target on Ned's back from the left and the right, and this has horseshoed around and made this work challenging and difficult. The biggest threats used to come from these fringe actors on the left and right, and who thought that the Ned was the CIA, and there's always been a lot of kind of accusations of that sort around what the Ned was doing, because, again, you're meddling in the politics of another country. It's real. That's really what you're doing in a way. Now, I don't think it's a malign activity. What Ned does is supports groups that come from that country and say, we are trying to accomplish these goals of freedom and democracy, and we would like some support to do that. And and that's what happens. It's not about regime change, but I think, again, having lived through the freedom agenda in the Bush administration, this idea that democracy support became conflated with regime change also has that never got really worked out. And so that has tainted some of this work as well. So again, I think that we've been able to whistle bass graveyards multiple times over the past 20 years, but a lot of the kind of not really making that argument about what the NED does, is now coming back to, and kind of relying on friends in Congress to protect it with succeeding administrations, has, if you don't have that, if Congress isn't being effective in terms of being able to, and knowing that the executive branch can just stop the funding, they can just not act. This is, it's really, this is existential now for NED. And so I think that it's going to be, it's going to be difficult for them to navigate back into a place of, and I worry that they are now in a place where they are considered part of the resistance, or that they are part of, that they are in an oppositional place with the administration. It concerns me greatly, because it's too important of an institution to be allowed to go into that mode. It can't be, that can't be where they end up. They have to stay in that bipartisan, strongly bipartisan space with very strong bipartisan support. And so that, to me, right now is the biggest fear that I have about the NED, and because they really continue to be, as things are changing in the State Department and that funding is being drawn down, they really are the last line of defense for so many things right now.
Thank you. Olivia, can you talk about Radio Free Asia?
Yes, thank you for asking me about Radio Free Asia. There are so many reasons why RFA is important. Number one, RFA provides information access in incredibly closed countries. Even if we look beyond the China context, I also do a lot of work on North Korea. For North Koreans, access to outside information serves as a literal lifeline. It provides people with the information they need to either decide to stay in a country and facilitate change from within, or make the decision to flee. And so in the North Korean context, this is like absolutely essential. And in the Chinese context, all across China, beyond the Mandarin language services, you have Cantonese service, of course, you had Uyghur language service. It was a means of preserving culture in addition to providing information access. And so RFA serves as a really like a two-way street too, because they're not only providing information to vulnerable populations, those of us here in Washington were also getting information back from on the ground, and that was helping to inform many of the policy decisions, the reactions, the decisions that were being made at the highest levers of power. I mean, I think even some of the information about Uyghur genocide, for example, was broken. Those stories were broken by Radio Free Asia, and without them, we would not have that resource for good decision making. When I think about the importance of Radio Free Asia, or when I think about the importance of the NED, the reasons why they're so important is because of one of the main points I made in my remarks. They are a means and a mechanism of shifting the balance of power within a country. When you equip ordinary individuals with information, they have the freedom to do with it what they would like to do, but it enables them to advocate in a way that they would not be able to do without it. And so when the US government is thinking about strategy, when we have a US government that primarily thinks about security interests or economic interests as their primary goal, and when you have an administration that has at least said that it is a priority to counter the CCP, it does not make sense to leave valuable leverage that shifts the balance of power away from the CCP and toward ordinary people across China, that you would take that valuable resource off the table. So to me, that's why Radio Free Asia is so important, but also the work of the NED as well. So thanks.
Thank you for that. And if I could just add, I was in the Philippines earlier this year, meeting with Philippine government officials, and they were explaining that in the South China Sea, when there's incursions from the Chinese Coast Guards in some of the contested areas, that they would use the reporting from Radio Free Asia to get that message to the Philippine population about these aggressive actions in order to build public opinion in the Philippines to push back on China. So this is a human rights and democracy issue, but it's also a national security issue for the United States.
Yes.
Go ahead. No, Totally agree. I mean, Olivia's right. We used Radio Free Asia when I was in the administration information. It was very important, especially with the Uyghur genocide determination. We cited to their reporting. It was critical. And so I think that this feedback loop on information when it comes to RFA is a very important point to make with people who are thinking about American foreign policy and national security slightly differently than the way that we all might think about it, who do take a narrower view of what it is, what the U.S. should be doing outside of its borders and what makes sense from their perspective. I think that that is one of the strongest arguments in this issue with the Philippines, how we, we're talking about closed societies that, or really highly repressive media environments in many cases where otherwise, and our intelligence community is not as, it's not like what you see in the movies, I can assure you, right? Carolyn knows what I'm talking about. It's just, they are not all-powerful, all-knowing entities by any stretch of the imagination. And so we need every tool that we can get to get more visibility into what's going on in closed societies where we have very limited visibility. And it is, to me, the decision about RFA is just one of the silliest arguments that I just don't even understand what the purpose is of getting rid of RFA, and so that one's a real head scratcher to me, I have to acknowledge.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that I know that there are a lot of different solutions that are circling on the future of Radio Free Asia, and in my personal opinion, one of the most effective ways to preserve RFA and also, beyond our region, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, would be to just have a single line item for each of those specific entities so that they could have funding, and ideally to have that separate from USAGM, because I think the future of USAGM is incredibly uncertain, but to be able to give those line items would be very helpful. And I know that there are, thankfully, many people in Congress who are thinking about the preservation of Radio Free Asia, and so I think, for members of Congress to be really outspoken, to stick their necks out on this, it's very encouraging to see because RFA does have such bipartisan support. And I also wanted to add just one separate comment to, it's separate from Radio Free Asia, but the other challenge that we have too is the cuts to the DRL grants, or the proposed cuts to DRL grants. We're coming up on September 30th, which is this arbitrary deadline where many of the groups represented in this room have an uncertain future because of the uncertainty of the funding. Whether the grants are under DRL or under somewhere else, they have to continue because there are literal entire communities, not just here in Washington, of advocates who have long worked to advance universal human rights, fundamental, first freedom style human rights type of work that may not exist by the end of the year or even as soon as September 30th if this funding is not extended in some way, shape, or form. The uncertainty alone has created so many complexities for planning and for being able to defend the people that we are seeking to defend through this forum today.
And if I can just, I know our congressional visitors in the back, I see her, but I do want to speak to that because I have very specific things. The decision to put this money into the Regional Bureau is, it is unthinkable that the Regional Bureau of EAP is going to do a good job of managing these grants. Anybody who's ever worked with that Regional Bureau will know this immediately, and it is insane. I'm sorry, but it is an insane thing. That said, I think that if you're going to take these programs out of, if DRL is going away, which it is, I think that that's done, they're better housed in CPIC, keeping CPIC alive than in the regional programming at DRL, because at least then you have
Can you tell people what CPIC
I'm sorry, it's the Countering PRC Influence funds that Congress appropriates. They set up they have a programming office in China House already that is focused on, again, imperfect solutions to horrible problems, but at least it's a less imperfect solution than putting it in the new regional assistance programming at EAP that doesn't even want it. They don't even want to do these programs. So why would you make them do them? It's terrible. And then the other thing that I would say, going back to Ned and to some of these other things, Congress needs to get creative. They need to think about moving Ned into ledge branch appropriations. They need to think, they need to think out of the box about how do you protect some of these things and get them out of the executive branch's whims and into a place where if these are Congress's priorities, if Congress cares about these things, they need to put them in an appropriations format that they can actually control the money going out the door and not trust the administration to handle it and trust the executive branch regardless of who's in power. Because this is a long-running problem. Those of us who've done appropriations know what I'm talking about. You direct Congress directs the administration to do something and they go off and do the opposite because they have that ability in terms of spending the money. Congress needs to get more creative, and they've done some things in the past that have allowed them direct management of issues. They need to think about how they can do more of this, and I'm loath to dump more responsibility on my congressional staff friends, but I think that that's the only way that you actually see these things get saved and protected.
I'm going to take a pause here. We'll come back to the panel later, but I think our guest arrived just in time as we're talking about Radio Free Asia. Please welcome Representative Young Kim, Chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee Subcommittee on East Asia and Pacific, Vice Chair on of the Financial Services National Security Committee, and a consistent champion for human rights, including the support for Radio Free Asia and introducing the Hong Kong Judicial Sanctions Act. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I would like to apologize to the panelists for interrupting your wonderful discussion here. I'm Congresswoman Young Kim, and I have the pleasure and honor to represent California's 40th Congressional District. But here on the Hill, I serve as chair of the East Asia and the Pacific Subcommittee on Foreign Affairs Committee, which gives me the platform and the opportunity to address issues that we all care about, and that's one of the many reasons why you are here sitting in this room, to talk about the ongoing atrocity and the human rights violation that is committed against our friends and folks, especially we're talking about Hong Kong here. So I want to first congratulate the Hong Kong, the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation for doing this. This is the third symposium on the Hill. Thank you so much, and Ambassador Cunningham, for your leadership. Yeah, right here. I just walked in, so I just needed to know who's all here. And I also wanted to see if Sebastian Lai is here, but I don't see him. And he obviously, with his father's situation, have been one of the loud voices and advocates on this issue. So I want to thank you and congratulate you on hosting this third symposium, and I'm really honored to join you this afternoon. Since the committee was founded in 2022, 3 years ago, committee has been instrumental in maintaining that public pressure and bringing attention on the CCP's human rights abuses and violations that's occurring in Hong Kong. So today, I stand with you all in condemning the CCP's crackdown on Hong Kong and the passage of the National Security Law and Article 23 that expanded Beijing's draconian grip, targeting any dissenters and activists. These measures continue to erode Hong Kongers' freedoms and civil society, which has also resulted in the decline of Hong Kong as an attractive international business hub. I once remember traveling to Hong Kong and being awed by its just the prosperity that it presented, and now it's been eroding, and it's really sad to see that. So I echo the support of brave pro-democracy fighters like Jimmy Lai, who continues to be unjustly detained and denied internationally recognized human rights. In fact, Lai has been in solitary confinement for nearly 5 years, which has taken a serious toll on his health, which is why I appreciate all of you for continuing to speak out, not just on Jimmy, but everyone that is unjustly detained. So we need to continue to speak out on their behalf. Furthermore, we know there are over 10,000 individuals that have been detained since 2019 protests, with almost 2,000 detained since March 2024. And we know that there are nearly 800 remaining still in custody as of last month. So we stand with Jimmy Lai and all of you and all of those who are suffering under the Chinese Communist Party's reign of terror. And I refuse to let Beijing silence the voices of freedom-loving people. That's why I introduced Hong Kong Sanctions Act, for which I was sanctioned by CCP. You know, but we need to that is truly a badge of honor, and we're going to continue to do what we need to be able to hold officials accountable for human rights violations and uplift the voices of Hong Kongers. And this is one of many bipartisan pieces of legislation that collectively signal to Chinese Communist Party that Congress is committed to countering repression and fighting for restoration of judicial independence and freedom from authoritarian control. So I want to thank everyone gathered here today and helping to put the spotlight on Hong Kong's deteriorating situation. And as chair of the EAP Subcommittee on Foreign Affairs Committee, I will continue to stand with all freedom-loving people and work harder, if not the hardest, to hold our adversaries accountable. And again, I want to thank the panelists for continuing to speak about this and for you continuing to advocate and meeting with the members of Congress. And we're not going to stop, because I know you're not going to stop in this fight. So we are in this together. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Take a picture with all of our panels.
Oh, yes, of course. Do you mind?
We can all take a picture together.
Just come on, right? You stand right on the yellow line. That's fine.
I'd love to have all of them.
You first.
Just a little interruption, but she actually came right in time, so. John, you can proceed.
Congresswoman Young Kim being here in the middle of this panel is actually perfect timing, because she has been such a strong supporter of the Hong Kong cause generally, but also all these initiatives and programs that really are effective in countering China, in China and around the world. So let's talk about Beijing and how they're responding to U.S. policy of the last 6 months. There's a lot that's happened, both programmatic in terms of, some of the funding issues, but also the Trump administration's policies generally and what the president has said. Would love to hear both of your thoughts on how you think the Chinese government is reacting, and also our friends and allies in the Asia region. I know you guys both work with a lot of people on the ground in Asia. Kelly, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that, there has been a real impact. You've seen I think a structural rise in transnational repression of of organizations in country that, and as well as organizations in these countries, but grantees who are receiving. I mean, one of the most catastrophic things that have happened in the past 6 months was the leak of DRL's donors. And DRL was able to get it pulled right down after, but it only had to be online for 5 minutes for Beijing to be able to get what they needed. And so that was a truly horrifying thing that happened. And nobody's been held responsible for it. And that's unacceptable. People's lives were put in danger, and I know, organizations that have just gone dark completely. Their funders don't know what's happened to them, and so this is really, look, people make mistakes. This one, there needs to be accountability, and I think that this is really a challenge right now. Is that there isn't a lot of accountability when mistakes are made, and the oopsies here have consequences on the ground. So that's definitely an issue. You have a loss of what is the grantees themselves, the organizations, the frontline organizations feel they've lost that layer of kind of protection or interest or support from the United States, and that makes them more vulnerable. So they are being much more risk averse, much more cautious. They've shut down activities that they may have wanted to do, even if they have funding for them, just because they are afraid. And that is, again, that's a consequence of these decisions and of the kind of overall messaging that has gone out. I think that the other thing that we're seeing, I mean, there's been a lot of, if we don't do this, China's going to come in and fund it. And, for many of those things, they're not going to fund this stuff, that's for sure. But they are, and I think one of the things that you saw coming out of the last week was, Xi Jinping has 3 big initiatives that he's been touting for the past few years, with the Global Security Initiative, the Global Civilizational Initiative, and the Global Development Initiative, and he added a 4th one last week, the Global Governance Initiative. And so it's not directly, obviously, what the organizations working in the space are doing, but it is their response to it. And it is to strengthen authoritarian governance and to make it more resilient in the way that the United States used to have an objective of making democratic governance more resilient in our partners and allies. And so I think that you're seeing that as kind of the higher level, and then on the ground, more transnational repression, more targeting of these organizations, and a greater sense of vulnerability. And that's across other countries too. It's not just in China.
I think that a lot of the actions of the administration have handed the CCP a lot of free gifts. One that comes to mind is the proposal that whatever is the newly envisioned DRL will have some form of Western values in the name, as opposed to acknowledging that human rights are universal. It does not matter where you are from, you possess human rights, you possess them at birth, they're worthy of protection, and it is not a Western concept to protect those rights and those values. So I don't think we should be slipping into that type of language, which has for a long time been used by authoritarians to try to undermine the entire foundation of the work that we are doing. The second is that we have seen Beijing come in and backfill the void, in particular in the Radio Free Asia context. There was a really great Washington Post report that actually looked at the shortwave frequencies that Radio Free Asia used to occupy. I think it was something like 60. The CCP had not only backfilled those 60 shortwave frequencies, they had also added an additional 20, bringing their total to 80 shortwave frequencies that they were now either blocking, so that in the future Radio Free Asia couldn't use it if we were to reestablish it, or they are putting their own propaganda messages out. This is happening not only in the Chinese context specifically, this is also happening with North Korea, where the CCP is finding other means and mechanisms of sending information in through MP7s, MP8s. There's been some great work done by Daly and Kay to demonstrate this. So we see that when the US steps out of this space, other bad actors step in and they step up their efforts. And I think that that's something that, like, it really bothers me. But when I think about what makes the US unique and why so many people from different countries want to come here, want to be here, the thing that sets us apart is not just that the US government believes in defending the rights of American citizens, but that it takes care for and seeks to extend the blessings of freedom to other people around the world. That is what makes us exceptional, and if we don't retain that continued commitment to defending human rights and freedom, I think we risk losing what makes America unique and even what makes America successful in the foreign policy realm.
Thanks for that. A wise Speaker of the House once told me never stand between an audience and lunch. So I won't do that, but I have one more question. You know, we are fortunate to have two conservative policy experts here. Can I just ask you both, make the short conservative case for these programs and how you would make that case to a Republican policymaker who had the power to change policy?
If you look around the world and you see where there is conflict, you know, endemic poverty that just doesn't seem to go away, there is a direct correlation between those things and lack of freedom, lack of democracy, bad government, violation of human rights. Like, those things all go together. This has been empirically proven. This is not just my feeling, it is real. And so it's in our interest, if we don't want, you know, people feeling that their only choice in life is to try to come to the United States and migrate here, if you are trying to secure our borders, if you are trying to sell our goods to people, if you want people to be able to be good neighbors and not, you know, trafficking drugs to the United States or trafficking other people to the United States, all of the things that you claim to be worried about, then you should care about how those governments treat their people. Because if the governments treat their people badly, then they're not going to grow economically, they're not going to be prosperous, and they're going to be looking for a way out. And it's going to engender conflict, and this is just the reality. Doesn't mean that we have to get involved everywhere. We need to prioritize, absolutely. China is the biggest source of instability and the biggest driver of this authoritarian trend. We need to be thinking very strategically and clearly about how we're navigating that challenge. But that, you know, the idea that we can just walk away from these places and that their problems will never come to us is insane. And it is cheaper to try to deal with them overseas and over there than it is to deal with them when they show up at our borders or in our cities. And that's the reality. But we do need to make sure that these programs that there's good oversight, that they are targeted, that they are not wasteful, that we are not spending money on nonsense. Absolutely, 100%, could not agree more. But the idea that we need to grind them down to nothing is also, it's just foolish and penny wise and pound foolish, in my opinion.
I think that one of the strongest conservative foreign policies that we've ever had was under Reagan. And he really believed in peace through strength. And what peace through strength means is that you have an incredibly strong national defense, and you have an incredibly strong arsenal of tools to defend human rights and freedom. Reagan recognized that you can't have one without the other, that you have to have the two in tandem, and they have to work together beautifully. I think in Washington, we have a tendency to look only at the last preceding administration or the last two preceding administrations, and we forget both the errors that have been made by, you know, historical presidents, but also the things that have been done right. And I think that if you're going to move in a direction that, as a conservative administration, that departs from Ronald Reagan's successful policies of peace through strength, you better have an airtight reason for why you're abandoning those principles and those causes, and we have not received that to date. So I think that as a conservative, I feel like I have a responsibility to remind people of those successful policies and to think about how do we bring peace through strength into this new era what does that look like? How do we use some of the new tools that we have? And so I'm excited because I think that there's a bright future for human rights and democracy promotion going forward. But I think we have to reclaim and restore and conserve those things that are good, but make sure that they're working in the modern era. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. It's such a great panel to wrap up our program today. And thank you to all the speakers who, came over and, lead all these discussions. To close, let me welcome Ambassador Cunningham back for some final remarks. Afterwards, I will have just a few announcements before we end the program. So please do not leave after that. Ambassador Cunningham, welcome back. I know.
That's right, and I can be very quick because first, let me thank everybody on our staff, the foundation staff, who was involved in putting this event together. I think it was really tremendous discussion across the board over the last couple hours. I was particularly struck by the last discussion, because it kind of, in a different way, got back to where I started. I think I tried to start at least, which is, what is the kind of world that we want to see? And then how does Hong Kong and all the other stuff we've been talking about, but how does that fit into that paradigm? And if we're not willing to fight for the kind of world we want to see, that I still believe, after 40 years as a diplomat, I firmly believe that most people in the world want some variation of the kind of world that we want. The world that's defined not by the West, by the United States and Europe, but by the kind of values that are embodied in the West as an ideal, as a goal, set out in the UN Charter and other places, and that revolves around freedom, human dignity, and prosperity. The things that were valued and existed in Hong Kong and that now don't exist are imperiled. And if we're not willing to fight for those things in Hong Kong and elsewhere, I'm very afraid what happens in the decades to come. So I hope we can all take commitment from that, recall what our previous speakers said about shining light, whether it's a candle or a torch. Keep shining the light and keep fighting. So thank you very much. Lunch is served, I believe, but not before Francis announced it.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much, Ambassador Cunningham, for your remarks and your leadership at CFHK Foundation. As we wrap up this third annual Hong Kong Symposium, I want to pause and to honor everyone in this room and those who are fighting in any corners in this world, especially the Hong Kongers, Uyghurs, Tibetans, Taiwanese, and Chinese dissidents, whose resilience and advocacy in the face of repression continue to inspire us from across communities. As our title says, because there are repression happens, resistance exists. And so let's remember that and move forward in our shared commitment to freedom and human rights. Thank you to all of you from the bottom of my heart for being here and support us. And just a few quick announcements before we go to lunch and networking. First, at the back of the room, I think I mentioned this earlier, at the back of the room there is a table with all the reports that CFHK has published in the past 2 years covering religious freedom, sanctions evasion, foreign judges, the Greater Bay Area Initiative, and the most recent report on Hong Kong's prison conditions. And we also have a one-pager fact sheet on active legislations in Congress that are supportive of Hong Kong's movement. So please feel free to take what you need, and grab home and grab some for your colleagues or anything like that. We have a lot of copies, and it's also available on our website. Secondly, our president, Mark Clifford, published a new biography on Jimmy Lai, the troublemaker. So SCF offer, if you're interested, we have some free copies. So if you haven't had one, please feel free to get a copy at the check-in where Mark will, he also generously offered to sign the books if you guys are interested. So he will be out there. Then I want to recognize some of my colleagues here today. First, our MVP, Grace Young. Standing in the back, she's our event manager today. John Stivers, our Superman, and the U.S. team director. Shannon Van Sands for her wonderful presentations. Mark Clifford for moderating, and our UK team, including Mark Saba, David Green, and Chloe Chung, who flew all the way from London to help us in any way they can. So thank you very much. And finally, this movement is only possible with your support and engagement. Thank you for your solidarity. Whether you're here in the room, watching online, or supporting from afar, let's continue to strengthen this alliance and finding hope together. That's all from me. Please feel free to enjoy lunch and networking in the foyer until 2:30. Yep, and thank you very much. Hope to see you next year. We should, our team should take a picture. Yeah. Can I have the CFHK Foundation team come up, all the staff members come up?